Chapter 1054. In a quarter of an hour, all the plague knights were slaughtered to the last. Half an hour later, the countless kobolds that covered the mountains and plains finished their search. They excitedly pushed carts and took away everything that was shiny, hard, or could even scrape off a bit of iron powder. They threw a large number of skeletons into the charcoal fire, and threw the spoils of war into the furnace. Amidst the fanatical praises, pairs of eyes were illuminated by the furnace fire, causing the black fur of the kobolds to be covered in a layer of red light. An hour later, the sun's ship rumbled into the distance, and the ruins returned to silence. An hour and a half later, the sky shattered and countless black dots fell from the sky. A desolate storm blew from afar, bringing with it the wails of the remnants of hell and the mockery of those who had left. This time, no one dared to slack off or be careless. They advanced step by step. The army of hell was extremely vigilant, on guard against the attack of the sun ship at all times. The light of the large-scale secret ritual shrouded the sky and earth. But even after 2 hours, there were still no signs or traces of it. Amidst the whistling of the wind in the distance, the rulers of the two armies looked at each other, unable to hide their gloomy expressions, and even unconsciously relaxed and rejoiced. Maybe, that group of people from the present realm had really left, right? Left. On the altar, in the huge bronze mirror, there was a gorgeous and eerie palace, as well as a strange figure wearing a thin veil on the throne, looking down at his subordinates who were crawling under the stairs. His gaze was as if he was looking at 2 lumps of incombustible garbage that had suddenly fallen in front of him. It was filled with incomprehensible surprise and confusion. The host of the banquet pondered for a long time and finally seemed to understand what had happened. In other words, there were so many of you, a total of 5 legions, but not only were you unable to stop them, 3 of you were even killed. And then, you just let them leave like that? He made a gesture of flapping his wings and repeated, "Left?" None of the leaders of the reinforcements dared to speak. They just remained silent and crawled on the ground, trembling. In the silence, the host of the banquet held his chin and pondered for a long time. Suddenly, he came to a realization and couldn't help but pat the chair and laugh. "Ha ha ha, this joke is really good. I like your sense of humor. I admit that I was a little scared by you guys just now. You bunch of clever brats, always coming up with new tricks for me. Alright, I'll stop joking around. Where's the little cutie I want?" He looked up expectantly and said, "Hurry up and bring him here. Let me see if you've heard him." In the dead silence, there was still no one speaking. The subordinate who was crawling on the ground was sweating profusely. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead and fell into the dust. He could feel the gaze that fell on him gradually becoming heavy, and it was filled with a coldness and malevolence that made him shudder. There was no more hope. "You're not joking?" The smile on the host's face gradually disappeared. The subordinate swallowed his saliva with difficulty and nodded. "Then why are you bunch of trash still alive?" The wine cup in the host's hand gradually changed shape. The wine that was brewed from endless desire and thirst fell to the ground, wriggling like a living creature and making sizzling noises. "Damn it, 3 legions!" After 90 years, after being promoted to ruler, the host once again experienced a long-lost rage. More than 6 legions that were fully equipped with war weapons were all killed by a group of people from the present realm? Even if it were 3 legions of pigs, they wouldn't be able to kill them all in 2 days, right? In the bronze mirror, the furious host of the banquet threw out the wine cup in his hand. The bronze mirror shook violently, and the pinched cup broke through the air and smashed into the army overlord's head with a loud bang. Half of the army overlord's head was instantly blown away, and his entire body was sent flying away. But soon, the lord got up again. He didn't even dare to treat his upper body. He crawled back like a dog and kowtowed crazily. He wanted to cry but had no tears. "I didn't expect it either, Holy Lord. We've already sent reinforcements as fast as we can without any delay. But who would have thought that the people in front would be so fast for nothing? This matter really couldn't be blamed on him. After receiving the news, he rushed over and didn't even have time to drink a mouthful of water. But who would have thought that he didn't make it in time? Who else could he blame? The trash in front was already dead. Could he pull them out of the furnace and whip their corpses? Now there was no dust. Someone had to take the blame and be responsible for this. In hell, there was no such thing as limited responsibility. Instead, it was a cruel military punishment. A fair and just trial would never exist. Only the joy and anger of the superiors dominated everything. He hated those bastards to death in his heart. It was fine if they died, but why did they have to drag them down with them? But now, he had to take out something, even if it was just a little harvest. He had to quickly divert the Holy Lord's attention. Otherwise, he would really be demoted to the slave army. A survivor! He was quick-witted, and his eyes lit up. We also found a survivor. There's still a guy alive. He must know something. In the long silence, a cold gaze quietly looked at him. After a long time, the host said, "Bring him up." Soon, the sound of galloping horses was heard. With a tragic cry, an iron cage was dragged over. When the door of the cage was opened, the ghoul, who was almost on his last breath, rolled out. He whimpered and panted with difficulty. He was convulsing and trembling. Could be seen that those people treated him very well. They even bandaged and treated his wounds, as if they were afraid that he would die. They even used bandages to tie a huge bow on his head. Now, the bow had long been dyed red with blood. It became more and more festive and funny. The host of the banquet glanced at it coldly and returned to his throne. His fingers tapped on the back of the chair impatiently. "Are you mute?" The army overlord kicked him. "Speak!" The ghoul curled up on the ground, twitching. He tried to open his eyes and look around. Finally, he mustered his courage and looked at the projection of the ruler on the bronze mirror. "That person, he said." The ghoul's tears flowed. "He asked me to bring you a message." The host's expression froze slightly, and he raised his eyebrows. He said. While choking, the ghoul began to twitch violently. It was as if something was rapidly growing and expanding in his body, greedily devouring his soul and internal organs, dominating his will. It was as if molten iron was flowing out of a furnace, causing its eyes to emit a dazzling radiance. Through the ghoul's eyes, it cast a cold glance at the ruler. A low and calm voice sounded from its throat, conveying the words from Huai-Shur. It was full of tiredness, disgust, and 120,000% impatience. He said, "It's about time." At that moment, the intense light in his eyes finally turned into flames. It spewed out from his mouth and nose, rising rapidly and completely burning the ghoul. But in his chest, under the sutures, an iron wheel finally moved to the last grid. There was a crisp sound. Ding! It was as if a tuning fork had been struck, causing another tuning fork buried deep under the ground to resonate. Like the lingering sound at the end of a movement, the ground began to wriggle like the waves of the sea. Hell trembled. Fissures appeared out of thin air on the bulging ground. What rose from within them was an intense light of destruction. With 2 whole legions as the materials, the fury of Ramses gushed out. Hundreds of tons of metal explosives were scattered under the ruins, and a huge explosion cycle was formed by secret instruments and iron wires. Above a small spark, the burning sea tore the earth's crust apart and reached out to the sky. Embrace hell. What followed was endless darkness. In the center of the explosion, a pitch-black bullet quietly disintegrated, and the solidified divinity from Great Sea Ming flowed out. In an instant, it covered everything, eroded everything, and dissolved everything. It devoured everything that was covered by the shock wave. When the earth-shattering shock swept through, the original ruins were gone, along with the 1.5 legions stationed around. Only a deep crater was left. The flawless and smooth walls formed a hemisphere of Tianqing. And in the center, on top of the remaining stone pillar, there was only a cracked bronze mirror left. The gravely injured feudal lord crawled on the ground and coughed violently, spitting out his internal organs and blood. He did not dare to moan. He could only kowtow to the bronze mirror and beg frantically. On the cracked mirror, the host of the feast did not speak. She only looked down at everything silently. After a long time, she sighed faintly. "Tell me, why did I raise a bunch of trash like you?" In the mirror, there was a boiling voice. It was as if some kind of sticky gelatinous substance had torn apart the container. The surrounding shamans screamed in horror and fled. The host of the feast's body was rapidly expanding. Dozens of big mouths filled with sharp teeth slowly opened on her gorgeous and strange face and swallowed all the living things in the entire hall. Until finally, in the darkness, there was only a furious gasp. "Mobilize all the legions and manpower in the nearby depth." Dozens of screams overlapped and turned into an ear-piercing roar. "Chase after her." Counting the time, our gift should have been delivered, right? On the bridge of the sun ship, Huai Shi glanced at the time on the screen. "I wonder how the reaction is?" "It's just as you expected." Water-embroidered Snail, who had been admiring the ultra-high-definition image in the front row, said, "The child is very delicious and likes the food very much." After the host of the feast received it, she was moved to tears. "An excellent counterattack and warning," Odom concluded. "According to my observation, many people who heard the news and wanted to take advantage of it have already retreated. It can be predicted that in the next few days, we will get a rare period of peace. But as a price," it paused for a moment and said softly, "next, there will definitely be more severe storms, right?" Chapter 1055. Violent Storm? Huai Shi moved her gaze away from the depth map, and it was as if she had heard a joke. "A rainstorm like this? Do I need to buy an umbrella?" "This is just the beginning," Odom said. "There are more people with chips in their hands who haven't entered the arena yet. Don't forget, compared to the real casino in the reality, we might just be a slot machine. The heavyweight gamblers aren't interested in such small fights. The Battle of the Worlds is the stage they are looking forward to." Huai Shi was curious. "If it's just these, how can it be considered a violent storm? If I remember correctly, you are only grade 3? Can all grade 3 in the reality be like you?" Odom said. "Even if they are rulers with authority, there are still differences between them." "Oh, I know this. There are big bosses like the Withered King, and there are also rotten dreams." Huai Shi suddenly understood. "Speaking of which, who is the host of the feast? Because he is a new ruler in the past 100 years, not many people know the details. Limited by time, he was not able to do anything in the dark abyss. However, his authority, the eternal carnival, should be infinitely close to the power of demonic desire. He is a seed of the abyss hatched by Buoxuan himself. He is known as Buoxuan's youngest son, his beloved embryo. Although his sphere of influence is narrow, he has a lot of good things given by Buoxuan." Speaking of this, it paused subtly for a moment as if looking somewhere else. It seems that he was provoked by you and smashed a lot of things just now. He has a bad temper. How is it my fault?" Huai Shi didn't care. "Where were we just now?" "Ruler," Odom said. "Sometimes the existence of a ruler represents the group itself, but there must also be the existence of brothers and sisters. Just like the respected elder who served you, the crowns under the ruler are an extension of their will. Similarly, sometimes the strength of the brothers and sisters depends on the master they are loyal to. Some people were crowned because they were not strong enough, and some people are crown wearers because their bosses are too strong. Not only are there differences between rulers, but even the crown wearers are also very different in terms of strength." Odom sighed helplessly. "Look at me. Even if I'm the leader of a horde, I can't even defeat a kobold. I'm a disgrace to all creatures of hell. Is that so? Huaishur was slightly surprised. That's right, that's right. Odom nodded seriously. His abstract expression was extremely sincere and without any pretense. The image vividly displayed the subtext that I was a useless person. Even if Huaishur didn't believe a word of it. In short, your deeds have been successfully spread throughout the abyss after days of struggle. From the fallen kingdom to the blessed land, your evil name was known by everyone, no one did not know of it. However, even though it had intimidated many small fries, it was bound to provoke a backlash. Even if the rulers are busy focusing on the War of the Worlds and have no time to care about ants like us, they will definitely make arrangements. Odom looked deeper into the abyss. For example, just now, under the orders of the banquet master, the corrupt order sent out the champion of sorrows. That was the leader of a horde blessed by Bushuan, the champion of the Knights of Torment. Even if it was just him alone, it was enough to decide the outcome of a war in hell. I hope you don't confuse him with those small fries. Similarly, a blessed person from the blessed land led a whole group of hunting angels. It can be confirmed that they have their eyes on you. That was a fork that the rancher was quite fond of also. It seems that two of the twin giants from the Sea of Thunder have also regarded you as the next target of their skull-hunting mission. At the same time, Golden Dawn also seemed to have some movements, but their main focus should be on the construction of the stairway to hell. They won't get too involved. In the short term, out of fear of Russell, they may choose to be cautious and watch from the sidelines. But you know, if there's a chance, they won't mind getting some interest back from you. Sounds like the situation is really bad. Huaishur sighed. Can it be worse? Of course it can. Odom said everything he knew. The closest now should be the Solidifier organization that almost died out under the pursuit of celestial genealogy, the Children of Doomsday. They hired a whole Black Death army and are about to reach a certain depth. Apart from that, another workshop owner had already brought his factory up to the surface rapidly. And, as you expected, your jester friend hasn't given up and is still running between the abyss, trying to connect more people to completely destroy your existence. At this point, Odom asked curiously, "What did you do to him? Why is he so, persistent?" "It's nothing, right? I just followed people to tear down his home, destroyed the plan that his family had prepared for hundreds of years, destroyed the only result, and seemed to have killed his only friend?" Huaishur thought for a moment and replied with some uncertainty, "Other than that, there shouldn't be anything else, right?" "I don't think there's a need for anything else." The snail was silent for a long time and sighed with admiration. "I always thought that you inherited the fine tradition of celestial genealogy, but I didn't expect the new generation to surpass the old. You're so young, but you've already surpassed the old. It's really amazing. Is this a compliment?" Huaishur wondered. "Of course," Odom said sincerely, "according to the words of the present world, it's really terrifying. You might even have the qualifications to be a president." Huaishur was speechless and really didn't know what to say. The reality was tragic enough. He really wasn't in the mood to joke. Just like that, time passed. After a few hours, Huaishur felt that the sun ship suddenly stopped. It stopped moving. "What's wrong?" Huaishur looked at the screen and frowned. "Is there an enemy?" But in the detection of the screen, there was nothing in the outside world. There was only a misty white fog like a veil enveloping everything. There was dead silence. Everything seemed to be sleeping in a tomb. "It's not an enemy." Anton looked up and stared at the faint outline in the mist. There was no change in expression on his old face, but his palm pressed on the table was so hard, as if he wanted to grab and hold something tightly. After a long time, he finally relaxed. He said, "We're here. The transit station and the development base of hell that had been abandoned for decades. Depth 51, Samara 3rd Communications Center." In the beginning, this place was once a sentry post established by the genealogy of the Russian Federation. The knights who participated in the Holy Eastern Expedition killed all the way here and temporarily reorganized. They left behind a solid fortress, built a simple church in hell, and buried their companions who died in battle. After saying goodbye to the dead, the knights who did not return went deeper into hell and were never heard from again. But its location was recorded through the resonance of the church and remained in the depth map of the Russian Federation. Later, after the Republic began the development project of Hell, the Russian Federation provided everything it could, including its location. The successors re-established their foundation here, built walls and camps, and named it after the city of the Russian Federation. Then, after more than 40 years of development, step by step, this place became one of the important transit stations and hubs. There were dozens of different paths to Hell connected through the resonance between the lighthouses, forming a fixed orbit and flight schedule. It was precisely because of its existence that the ascendants were able to explore the withered area and even advance to the dark abyss at its most glorious time. There were hundreds of ascendants, 6 laboratories, dozens of scholars and alchemists from all over the world. When Huai Shi and the others arrived, it had already been silent in this thin fog for decades, and no visitors had come. Originally, according to Huai Shi's best fantasy, there might still be people here who would continue to defend it. After all, there was food, weapons, and reserves here, enough for them to last for 100 years. When outsiders approached, they would issue a warning, telling these guys that this was the Republic's territory, and they'd better go back to where they came from, or they would fire. And after he revealed his identity, the old people might be so excited that they would cry, curse, take out their treasured wine, have a hangover, and question why they only came here now. In this way, Huai Shi could tell them that the present was different from the past. Now, everything would usher in a new turn. Unfortunately, even when they arrived, there was still no sound. It was a scene of devastation. Under the light source emitted by the sun ship, the thin fog tore apart, revealing the dilapidated walls of the past, as well as the ruins covered in moss and dust. It was as if a storm had wreaked havoc. The traces of war were still left here. There were still traces of destruction on the walls that hadn't collapsed. The overheated and warped machine guns and the unused bullets were abandoned on the pedestal of the courtyard. The completely destroyed defense system had long been buried in dust. There were even more tearing claw marks. Huge claw marks covered most of the place. Ferocious beasts galloped past here and completely destroyed the precarious defense line. The shouts and roars of the past seemed to be engraved in the air, as if one could hear them again if they closed their eyes. But nothing was left behind. They were all gone. It's all gone. Anton stood in front of the ruins and sighed. He took off his helmet, revealing his white hair. Huai Shi subconsciously reached out to stop him, but the old man waved his hand indifferently. It's okay. I've just checked. The laws here are still operating normally. Besides, the air index is normal. There won't be a problem. Be careful. Huai Shi reminded him and stood beside him, shrouding the shadow of the ultimate under his feet. It's okay. Anton was silent for a moment before saying softly, I just want to see it again. The old man pushed open the broken door. He walked inside. Chapter 1056. There were no hidden enemies or predators. Just like the surrounding area, this place was so desolate that it seemed that even Hell's creatures could not survive here. Other than them, there were no other living creatures. Behind the door, the hall with the collapsed ceiling was silent. The schedule hanging on the wall had already turned yellow and was in pieces. The table was also in pieces. No one picked up the ballpoint pen that had rolled on the ground and hid it in the crevices of the stone. How nostalgic! Anton stopped in front of the wall and stared at the wooden frame that had no traces of its original state. He knocked on the middle and turned to Huai Shi. In the past, my name was hanging here. Huai Shi was slightly stunned. He followed behind him and went inside. They passed through the dilapidated corridor, the empty laboratory, and the messy rooms that had long been covered in dust. The walls and ceiling were full of cracks. There were no mottled bloodstains or tragic scenes. 70 years was enough for everything to disappear in time. Even the ruins had become gentle. It was as quiet as a tomb. Finally, the old man stopped in the courtyard and looked at the remains of a bench. After a long time, he patted the back of the chair, bent down, and took out an iron box hidden in the crack below. After opening the box, the cigarette ash inside scattered out. Anton immediately beamed. "Ha, it's still here." He sat on the bench, the old seat that used to belong to him, and looked at Huaishur. "Do you have a cigarette?" "I didn't bring it." Huaishur patted his trouser pocket and replied awkwardly, "After becoming a teacher, I always felt that it was a bad influence on the students, so I decided to quit." "It's good to quit." Anton smiled in an unconcerned manner. He pulled out a small crumpled bag from the inner pocket of his protective suit. Pinching out his last cigarette, he sniffed it but did not light it up. Instead, he simply hung it by his lip. "In the past, my teacher also advised me to do this, but I didn't care. Later on, when I became a teacher and a parent, I realized that when children see me doing bad things, they really feel uneasy and ashamed." He hugged the box of the past and whispered with nostalgia, "Back then, I followed my teacher here for an internship. Although it sounded nice, in reality, I only did some electrical work and odd jobs every day. Even if everyone was working towards a great goal, someone had to be responsible for some trivial matters. My day's work revolved around circuits and gate. Most of my work was to wrestle with screws and nails. The only entertainment was a glass of wine during the weekend dinner, so occasionally, everyone would secretly play cards behind the supervisor's back. After all, the salary isn't much and there isn't much money to lose. All I can do is read books. Life is pretty boring." When he said this, he suddenly fell silent for a long time. He lowered his head. He stared at the ashes in the box. "People are never satisfied, right?" Anton said softly. "They never know how happy they are." Huaishur didn't say anything. He remained silent. Sometimes, people would only realize how precious the peaceful life of the past was after losing everything they were used to. The biggest illusion of people was to think that everything could continue and never change. But change always came so quickly. It caught people off guard. The deeper they went, the more they could feel the changes brought about by time. The former Third Communications Center no longer existed. Everything was changed beyond recognition in the war. Some were destroyed by hell creatures, and some were destroyed by humans. The engine room, warehouse, control center. There weren't many intact things. But the silver lining was that many things inside could be dismantled and repaired before continuing to be used. Even if it was just these, it was enough to temporarily fill the huge gap in the sunship. They didn't make a wasted trip. But Huaishur couldn't feel happy at all. Because from the beginning to the end, he could only find traces of destruction and struggle, but he couldn't find any bones. The scattered crows searched again and again, but to no avail. All the remains had disappeared. Along with the violent destruction, there were no remnants left. "Maybe everyone has retreated to other places." Huaishur forced a smile, trying to comfort Anton. "Maybe." Professor Anton calmly walked in front and said, "It's also possible that it was deliberately destroyed. If they had retreated to other places, it was impossible to leave such traces of fierce struggle. Moreover, the list of all the survivors in the Great Retreat was in the database of the Ivory Tower. It was impossible for there to be no news for so many years. Regarding this, he had long since been mentally prepared. After all, celestial genealogy has such a bad reputation in hell, and there are so many deep grudges. It's not surprising that someone would do such a thing. It's just that there are no bones left. As early as when the development agreement was signed, everyone was mentally prepared for this. As he spoke, he lowered his head and counted the remaining equipment and supplies in the warehouse. His expression was as usual, and there was no change in his expression. Help me remove the back cover here. He pointed to the huge rusty equipment. Okay. Huaishe reached out and touched it slightly. After sensing the internal structure and the thickness of the shell, he cut off the bolts with a clean cut. The heavy cover that was more than a person's height fell off from the main body. Anton opened the tool bag and carefully removed a crystal plate that was covered with all kinds of chip. He blew off the dust on it, and after confirming the model number again, he put it in the storage box for precision parts. Only then did he finally let out a sigh of relief. It seems that I didn't remember wrong. When we built this place, because the technical department was lazy, in order to clear out the previous inventory, they gave the main control center's positioning system in the design. They directly used the components of the previous generation's phased array radar. At the time, it was very troublesome to maintain. Who knows how many times everyone scolded it. In the end, we didn't expect that it would be convenient for us. Now, the origin substance tracking system for the fire control equipment can be completed. Huaishe followed behind and was responsible for carrying the precious items in the boxes. Together with Anton, they searched the entire base. They were like scavengers, carefully picking out any precision instruments and equipment that had not been completely damaged. If they could carry it away, they would carry it. If they couldn't, they would take it apart and send it into the sun ship's workshop. When they passed by the dilapidated dormitory, Anton looked at it for a long time, lost in thought. He pointed at his original room to Huaishe. At that time, the first batch of people to retreat was given. Everyone gave me the spot in the maintenance department. It wasn't because I was the most important, but because I was the least important. You see, if the personnel needs to be reduced, then the plumbers and electricians have to be eliminated first. That's how I luckily survived. He laughed self-deprecatingly. When we left, everyone was so busy that they didn't even have time to say goodbye. They only urged me to make more reports after returning to the present realm and send more supplies over. Everyone thought that the retreat was temporary and that they would return one day, including me. Therefore, when we said goodbye, we didn't think that we wouldn't be able to meet again. The old man sighed softly. There are still too many things that haven't been done. What a pity. Huaishe thought for a moment and answered seriously, a friend once told me that meeting and parting are always common. As long as everyone has laughed to their heart's content when they meet, there is no need to regret after parting. Although every time I think of him, I can't help but feel sad. But I feel that if I have to say goodbye to someone one day, I will definitely be like him, giving my parting friends expectations and wishes. After Anton heard this, he was silent for a long time. Then he laughed softly. My teacher might scold people. His temper isn't that good, and he never says anything gentle. However, I'm a little stronger than him now. He should be able to calm down and have a good rest. After he finished speaking, he shook his head and said to Huaishe, let your group take care of the rest. Just follow the markings on this blueprint. The infrastructure hasn't been destroyed too much. After dismantling it, there are still many things that can be used. On the blueprint he handed over, the dismantling parts were already indicated. They were densely packed and didn't leave anything behind. Huaishe hesitated for a moment. This is the place where they fought for the last time. Is it okay to destroy it all? Professor Anton looked at him strangely. If it's useful, they would have helped you chop and burn these things when they were alive. Besides, they're already dead, so there's no need to care about this. Just take it that they've already agreed. When making such a decision, the old man didn't have the slightest bit of nostalgia or reluctance. He just looked around at the place where so many people had lived and protected together, as if he wanted to imprint everything in his mind. In the past, my teacher told me that we can't choose how to come and leave this world, but we can choose what to live for. Everyone chose to join the Republic because of this reason. Therefore, sacrifice and death are always common. It's not surprising. What the dead couldn't do, the living have to continue doing. What the ancestors couldn't do, the juniors have to do. If someone stops us, then we have to be enemies with them. If the predecessors pass away, then we have to turn their deaths into daggers and stab them into the enemy's heart. It was as if they were responding to his words. A gentle wind blew from the distant mist, causing his white hair to flutter slightly. A crisp sound came from the window. It was a necklace left behind by the deceased. A rusty iron plate hung on the broken chain, and the words on it could no longer be distinguished. In the silence, Anton quietly stared at the nameplate that swayed in the wind and couldn't help but smile. He reached out, gently picked it up, and hung it around his neck, together with his own. My dear friends, let us reignite the furnace and forge everything. He lowered his head and promised softly, I promise that everything that disappears in the rain will be reborn in the flames. No one responded. Only the sound of iron pieces colliding with each other could be heard. It was like the laughter of the past. Long time no see, everyone. I'm back. Chapter 1057. 2 hours later, under the destruction of the sun ship's mechanical arm and the iron crows, the buildings collapsed into dust. The kobolds pushed carts back and forth between the ruins and the construction site. The snake men crushed the bricks and sent them to the assembly line. Then, they extracted the alloys and origin substances that had been fused into them in the past. The massive steel structure was pulled up by the crane, rising from the ruins. After being dismantled and modified, it was sent into the workshop. There were even more instruments and equipment. Those that could be used were all taken away. Those that could not be used were all dismantled, leaving behind the necessary parts as spare parts. The rest were all sent back to the furnace to be recast. Once again, the sun ship was covered in a brand new metallic light. From beginning to end, Anton sat in front of the base, silently watching, witnessing everything. When he left, he returned to his workshop and began to work. It was as if he had already used up a lifetime of rest. Without sleep or rest, day or night, he continued to produce and modify with shocking efficiency. Huaisher turned a blind eye to this. Apart from occasionally confirming Anton's vital signs and the necessary sleep, he did not stop him. There was no need for those meaningless concerns and obstructions. Everyone here had gambled everything, not only for themselves and their future, but also for the inheritance and weight from the past. Thus, the work continued. The mission also continued. The sun ship rumbled forward, advancing through hell. The further they went, the stranger the entire world became. A thick fog enveloped everything. There was not a single living thing to be seen. In the seemingly eternal silence, only the fog silently danced. Sometimes it would rain, and sometimes the rain would suddenly disappear. The signs of day and night gradually became less obvious, and the direction also became more and more chaotic. More importantly, the index of depth also began to become ambiguous. It was constantly changing. Sometimes it seemed like they were in the Earth realm, but sometimes it was frighteningly high. The sun ship always activated the highest driving depth stabilizer, and it was difficult to bear the load at the highest peak. Sometimes it seemed like there was a silent city or some mountain range passing by them. But when the searchlight shone over, only an illusion could be seen. Thanks to such a strange environment, even the soldiers chasing after them had to slow down, buying them precious time. If it weren't for Odom's presence, they would have been lost in this strange area. They could have relied on their fellow clansmen sleeping in the depths of the fog to determine their direction and guide them. He didn't even know how deep he had gone, how many hells he had passed, and what kind of places he had passed. Sometimes the ground would suddenly be torn apart, and fissures and deep valleys would appear. They couldn't see the bottom of the darkness, so they could only take a detour. Under the pressure of sun ship, stones would crumble from the edges of the deep valleys and fall into the darkness. Sometimes they would suddenly fall in front of them. Or perhaps it would smash into the barrier. Welcome to the Scar area, everyone. On the bridge, Odom said straightforwardly, Looks like we're about to enter the second half of our journey. Congratulations! Unfortunately, once one entered this area, the changes in depth would become very strange. From now on, other than navigation, I'm afraid I can no longer provide you with a convenient and rapid return service. Not only here, even up and down, all the way to the deepest part of the dark area, there are unknown disturbances. Even the path to enter here is uncertain. The deeper you go, the more complicated the situation becomes. In a short period of time, you don't have to worry about the pursuers behind you. Just focus on moving forward. Is this the curl formed by the deep backflow? Huai sure stared at the gradually strange world outside the sun ship. It was a strange domain formed by countless fragments of hell pieced together. This was the phantom pain that had lasted from the beginning of the Great Retreat to the present. The Scar area. With the fall of Kingdom of Heaven and the birth of the destruction element, the Golden Dawn project that amended Hell back then had buried most of the elites of the Utopia in Hell. The original Golden Dawn project was an extension of the fourth project, Kingdom of Heaven. It was a subsidiary organization that was born in order to smoothly enter the second phase after the birth of Kingdom of Heaven. Its mission was to gradually transform the deep area through several stages and turn it into an extension of the border, the back garden of the present realm. Then, a new stage of exploration was launched toward the deeper areas. First, it was the deep area, then the withered area, followed by the dark abyss. This way, step by step, with the present realm as the foundation, nibbling away at Hell. Many outposts in the deep area were also established as the early warning and defense institutions of this project. At that time, the trend of pioneering among the sublimated people of the present realm was unprecedentedly strong. Not only the Utopia, but exploration teams belonging to various lineages almost covered most corners of the entire abyss. It was worth mentioning that Huai Shi's ancestor, Huai Guang, had dug out his first bucket of gold during the pioneering at that time and laid the foundation for the Huai clan shipping. And just as everyone knew, whether it was the Utopia, the Fourth Project, Kingdom of Heaven, the Golden Dawn Project, or even the inconspicuous Huai clan shipping, they all ushered in a lonely ending. What was achieved was only the Golden Dawn, which existed as the destruction element from then on. Its purpose also changed from protecting the present realm and expanding Hell to destroying the entire world and making Hell swallow everything. It was like the moment the rancher was born, the gods ushered in the destruction of the god. The Utopia was also subverted by the Golden Dawn, including everything they had created in Hell. It was also buried in the deep backflow. Under the scheming arrangements, Kingdom of Heaven went completely out of control the moment it went online. Not only did the present realm suffer unprecedented waves, but all the malice hidden in the darkness finally erupted from Hell. Under the Golden Dawn Project, all the hubs of Hell created to correct the depth were completely connected in an instant. Even Hell was involved. Like a directional explosion, from the edge of the present realm all the way to the bottom of the abyss, a straight crack was artificially created between countless depths. Immediately after, the gravity of the present realm triggered an unprecedented siphoning effect. In the end, what was created was a tragic blowout from the bottom of the abyss. The power from the quiet area was like oil, gushing upward through the open sluice gates. The violent turbulence not only awakened many silent rulers in advance, but the blowout also sent many hells to depths that did not belong to them. Even the fragments of Hell in the quiet area and the monsters sleeping there were thrown in the direction of the present realm. Countless tributaries gathered in one place and gradually formed a terrifying impact that was enough to shake the three major blockades. In the end, before the big wave was completely formed, all the people who received the notice had to make a choice. Should they seize the last moment to retreat? Or should they gamble everything with a success rate of less than 5% and sacrifice everything to turn back and close the sluice gate that was about to bring destruction? They only had less than an hour to consider all of this. But in the end, the time they spent was less than half a minute. Orton, Ing Fangzhou, Gerard, Chachel, Murian, Arthur, Yuri, Li Jing. Countless heroes made their own choices and stepped on the path to death without hesitation. More than 20 lines of defense, dozens of positions in different depths, as well as ascendants, scholars, and alchemists from all over the world. On that day, in the endless depths, in the countless hells, the shining brilliance of the stars illuminated the darkness of the blowout and blocked the front of the crack. In the end, they exchanged for a miracle that was enough to overturn the disaster. The door of destruction was closed again. The remaining impact was blocked outside the realm by the 3 major blockade. The aftermath formed a deep scar between the countless hells, and it had not healed even after decades. And as a price, only a few people survived that short rescue. The elites and a large number of grassroots members of the Utopia were completely buried. There was no room for redemption. What Huai Shi and the others saw now was only a ripple left in hell. The true torrent had long been annihilated in the past, along with the dead. At this moment, Huai Shi stared at the white fog outside the sun ship and the grave-like silent world. Perhaps it was no different from a cemetery. The past glory, achievements, and even that glorious era were all buried in this eternally silent world. Even though he was already prepared, when he really witnessed all of this, he didn't know whether to be proud or sad. "It's so quiet," he murmured softly. After a long time, he closed his eyes and gradually fell asleep during the long journey. The sudden dream seemed to pass by in a flash. He slowly woke up, but in a daze, he heard a song coming from not far away. The soft and deep humming echoed in the vast and lofty world. When Huai Shi opened his eyes, he found that everything in front of him was completely different. He could no longer see the furnishings on the sun ship. There was only a barren land that extended to the end of his line of sight. The empty world seemed to have been abandoned long ago. Above the gloomy sky, the dim light sprinkled down, illuminating all the vague silhouettes. The entire world had lost its color. Only a red skirt fluttered in the wind, elegantly fluttering in the air like a flame burning. And a familiar side profile. Close at hand, she stood in front of him, looking at everything. There are only illusions of the sun and stars in the sky, and the earth in the darkness is lifeless. The figure had her hands behind her back as she stared at the world with her contractor. "Look, Huai Shi," she said, "this is hell." "Tongyi?" Huai Shi sat on a chair and looked around blankly. It was difficult to determine what kind of bizarre change this was, or if it was his own imagination and illusion. "Long time no see." Tongyi lowered her head and winked at Huai Shi, smiling slightly. "Did you miss me?" Huai Shi was stunned. "Why are you here?" "Of course it's because you missed me." Tongyi smiled gently. A strand of hair fluttered slightly and brushed across his face with a familiar aura. "So, I came," she said. "I came to your dream." Chapter 1058. In a dream? Huai Shi suddenly understood and responded, "You dragged me into this dream?" "No, it's the opposite." Tongyi half forcefully pushed him aside and squeezed into the chair. She put her arm around his shoulder and sighed. "It's your dream that's calling me, Huai Shi. That's why I'm here." She turned around and looked at Huai Shi with a faint smile. "Is it so hard to admit that you missed me, Huai Shi?" I didn't, don't talk nonsense." Huai Shi subconsciously shook his head and refuted. Just as he was about to say something, he heard a sigh beside him. "Speaking of which, you seem to have become a little gloomy recently," Tongyi sighed softly. "Even your dreams are so tragic. Did something happen? In the past, at least I would occasionally go to the beach with the girls. Oh, the hot summer, the laughter, the waves and cold drinks, the sound of the tide and volleyball. Now that I think about it, I really miss it." Huai Shi's body subconsciously tensed up. He didn't know if it was because Tongyi was too close to him or because of her words. He was frightened and nervous. Don't be shy, I don't know anything." She dragged her strange tone and her smile became more and more cheerful. Although there are a lot of people, the content is quite complete. At most, it's at the level of 16 plus. Isn't it a little too innocent? Ha, so cute. Doesn't that mean you know everything? Why sure trembled with anger, and tears almost flowed down his face. I'm just trying to give you some privacy. Tangi blinked innocently with a sincere face, completely ignoring the huge trauma that her contractor's heart had suffered. I haven't told you about the dreams in the library, during recess in the office's lounge, and the candlelight dinner. It's my fault, please don't say any more, let me go. Why sure put his palms together and didn't dare to act rashly. Did you come all the way here just to urge me to hang myself? No, it's just that I haven't been out for a long time and felt that you seemed to need someone to accompany you, so I came over to take a look. Tangi took a sip from a cup of milk tea that came out of nowhere. Just in time. I'll let you rest for a while. Huaishi's hand suddenly sank. A cup of milk tea appeared out of thin air. Double pearls, 3 parts sugar. It was perfect for his taste, and it was steaming hot as if it was real. After he took a bite out of curiosity, he tasted a mellow and delicious flavor that he had never imagined. Dreams can even simulate this? Oh, just take it as a gift from a kind-hearted person who saw that you were sad. Remember to say thank you. Tangi sighed with emotion and looked into the distance. It was as if she could see another dream, where an unlucky person who had waited in line for several hours for milk tea was met with an unexpected disaster. Her fingers moved slightly, and the queuer who wanted to cry but had no tears felt that he was hit on the head by a heavy box. The box fell to the ground, and the banknotes inside fell out and drowned him. And in another dream, a group of robbers who were in a fierce firefight with the police didn't realize that the weight of the box in their arms had suddenly lightened a lot. Countless bubbles of dreams seemed to be close at hand, but as her fingers moved, they disappeared again in the rainbow light of the silver sea and returned to nothingness. Replenish some sugar and calories. It's good for improving your mood. Tangi emptied the cup in her hand and threw it into the empty world. She looked at the hell in front of her and suddenly asked, because of the scar area? Yes. Huaishir sighed. Sometimes, although I already know and have been mentally prepared, I still feel sad when I see and touch it with my own eyes. That's their own choice. They have chosen the ending for themselves. Tangi said, for idealists there's nothing more satisfying than such an outcome. At least, it's better than living a life of inaction and dying silently in a hospital bed. Maybe. Huaishir was silent for a moment and asked softly, Tangi, why is there such a thing as hell? I know that everything has an ending, but why? Because it's also a part of the world, Huaishir. Tangi answered matter-of-factly, it's just like the present. Disasters and miracles are one, suffering and redemption coexist. Nothing appears out of thin air, and there are no miracles without a price in this world. Don't tell me you've never found it strange? Snake people, rat people, minotaurs. Why do so many creatures of hell have traces of the present? Or do you think that it's natural for most intelligent creatures in hell to look like humans? Huaishir was stunned. He couldn't answer. Whether it's humans or beasts, all life is formed because of miracles. But where do miracles come from? Tangi's smile was mysterious. There must be a reason for everything, Huaishir. Even if it's the wind and tide from afar, there must be butterflies flapping their wings and whales stirring up the waves in places you can't see. You should explore the reason. Huaishir shook his head and became more and more helpless. Don't keep me in suspense, Tangi. Can't you tell me the answer directly? Of course not. Tangi spread her hands helplessly. Some answers can be told to you directly, but some answers are only meaningful if you think about it yourself. Only this, Huaishir, you have to think about it yourself. You have to have your own answer. Huaishir didn't say anything. In silence, he drank his milk tea. After a long time, he shook his head. I suddenly feel that it's more convenient to be a tool in the past. At least I don't have to face these problems. The reason why tools are tools is that they have no choice. The chess pieces are placed on the chessboard, the soldiers are thrown into the battlefield, and the gods come to this world. The essence is the same. There is no difference between being driven by the will of others and being driven by fate. Why, sure, you have always felt that everything is involuntary. But when you really have the power to choose, why do you start to be nostalgic for the past? Tangi looked into his eyes and asked, "What are you worried about?" Why sure wanted to say something but stopped. He didn't know how to tell her that he was afraid. He was afraid of failure. No matter how tough he appeared, no matter how cold he was, once he thought of the consequences of failure, he couldn't help but want to run away. If one day, he failed to live up to the heavy responsibility entrusted to him and failed miserably, how could he face those companions who entrusted their lives to him and those who sacrificed themselves in hell for their future? "Do you know what I'm worried about, Huai Sure?" Tangi suddenly asked. When Huai Sure looked up in confusion, he saw Tangi's serious expression. "Huai Sure, if you love something more than yourself, then one day you will sacrifice everything for what you love. This is a matter of course," she said, "but when these people sacrifice themselves, they rarely think that there are still people in this world who love them more than their own lives. In my opinion, the failure of the utopia was due to this overly arrogant selflessness. There are always people who think that they can save everything and solve all the problems, but it's impossible. It's not shameful to admit the limits of one's existence. Even the powerful gods in the past can't do it. I can't teach you how to avoid failure, but I have to remind you. That is, don't become such an irresponsible scumbag, understand?" As she spoke, her face inched closer to Huai Shure's and her gentle breath caressed Huai Shure's face. Huai Shure's eyes reflected her own image, so solemn and serious. So close. Huai Shure froze in place, unable to move. He nodded with difficulty. "I will try my best." So, Tangi nodded in satisfaction, reached out, held his collar, and patted him on the shoulder. "Very good. Keep this attitude and remember what I said. I promise, Huai Shure, you will have a happy life and ending." She paused for a moment, and her smile became more and more cheerful. "Finally, for the sake of your good attitude in admitting your mistake, I'll give you another reminder." In the silence, Tangi asked, "Did you overlook something? Huai Shure, are the problems you want to solve only these that you know? The so-called jester, the so-called enemy, the so-called Hell Legion, are you afraid of such an enemy?" Tangi bent down and whispered in his ear, "Or is there something important that you have forgotten?" She paused for a moment, and her smile became more and more mischievous. "And is there really nothing left of the blowout caused by the deep backflow?" Accompanied by those soft words, the world in the dream shook violently. Something hidden in the deepest part of his thoughts was awakened by Tangi's words. The uneasiness and anxiety that had always been triggered by instinct and subconsciousness condensed into a tangible outline, rising from the deepest part of the dream. Something that he had subconsciously forgotten and ignored. The sky trembled and the earth cracked. The barren world was annihilated into nothingness. With Tangi's departure, the dream was shattered. But at the bottom of the dream, in the deeper dream, there was a bone-chilling evil emerging. In the endless abyss fragments, pure darkness surged, and a terrifying shadow rose from the deepest part of hell. The storm between the depths was just a ripple set off when it moved. The huge hell was just a bubble in front of it. Cries full of resentment and hunger spread. With just a glimpse of that colossus, it had already been branded in Huai Shure's soul, and could no longer be forgotten. Even if it was just an outline in his memories, it was enough to make the entire dream fall apart. At this moment, under Tangi's guidance, it once again appeared at the end of the dream that was on the verge of shattering. Once again, it cast a cold glance at him. That monster on Sun's ship. Huai Shure suddenly opened his eyes and gasped for breath. In a short moment, he was already drenched in sweat. He didn't dare to believe his own guess. That shadow that had appeared from the deepest part of the abyss when they had escaped from the white lightning plains, the colossus that had set off the storm, was actually still chasing after them? No, at the end of the day, was that encounter really a coincidence? Was such an exaggerated and terrifying thing attracted by that group of hunters hiding in the depths? Or was it that it had been awakened by the existence of sonship? An indescribable intuition told him that this was not a delusion. After experiencing a loss, the darkness did not return. Instead, it smelled the familiar scent that remained in the depths. It was full of resentment and thirst as it chased after them. Chapter 1059. We might be in big trouble. 15 minutes later, everyone gathered on the bridge. After listening to Huai Shi's speculation, their faces darkened. Gregory tossed the coin in his hand repeatedly in silence. Then he began to draw cards, and then he took out a spirit pendulum, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any trace of it. Usually, he would treat this kind of nonsense as nonsense. But if it was Huai Shi who said it, he had to treat it with caution. After all, his crow's beak was always so accurate. After a long time, the shepherd threw down his tools in frustration. If your precognitive dream isn't wrong, such a terrifying existence can only be born in a godforsaken place like the bottom of the dark abyss. In a short silence, no one said anything. The abyss eruption caused by the Golden Dawn had thrown many things into a depth that didn't belong to them. The quantity, quality, and scale were not inferior to a sudden war of the worlds, and it was an encounter without any warning or preparation. No one knew what kind of remnants would be left behind. Even in the scar area, the bones of all the victims were completely destroyed. This hatred for the kingdom of heaven could be said to be deeply engraved in their hearts. Now, they were being targeted by such a large monster. Everyone's heart sank. Why don't we turn around and run? The snail in the basket carefully poked its head out. For a moment, all the unhappy eyes fell on it. Odom could only bury its head in the leaves and pretend that nothing happened. If such a big thing was following behind us, it wouldn't have shown any signs, right? After Forster finished cleaning his gun, he suddenly asked, "What are you hiding?" Odom was stunned. "This is not within my surveillance range. Brothers, in all honesty, a guide can't be used as a satellite, okay? No matter how strong the rust snail's vitality was, it couldn't survive in the abyss outside of hell. It was too much to expect a group of water bears to travel across space. For a moment, it could only look at Huai Shi for help. Don't worry, I won't place unrealistic expectations on you. Huai Shi did not pursue this matter. You just need to do your job well. Sigh, being so straightforward really makes Snail a little sad. The rust snail scratched the top of its head with its tentacles, and its eyes flicked back and forth. But please rest assured that duty comes first. No matter what happens, I will abide by the agreement and send you to your destination. Of course, I can't deny that I find pleasure in it, but isn't this a sign of devotion to one's job? He was not ashamed of his bad taste at all. Instead, he was immensely pleased with himself. Although its origin was mysterious and somewhat annoying, this snail had not harmed any of their interests until now, nor had it triggered Huai Shi's alarm. Instead, it had conscientiously guided them on the route, doing a brilliant job as a guide. Not only did he answer all the questions, but he was also able to speak clearly and logically when it came to the products and specialties of certain parts of hell. If she walked in front with a flag on her head and waved it twice, it would almost make people suspect that she was a gold medal tour guide from some scenic spot. It could even be turned into food at critical times. It was simply impeccable. When he thought of this, Huai Shi looked at it with an especially appreciative gaze. Odom trembled all over. He subconsciously felt a little uneasy. He moved back a little. Unfortunately, the snail's speed was too slow, and it looked no different from standing in place. Fortunately, Huai Shi did not say something like, "If you don't want to become food, take a step back." Instead, He curiously stuck his head out and looked at it carefully. For some reason, there are some things that are inconvenient for me to show my face, so. He paused for a moment and said meaningfully, "Can I ask you for a small favor?" 10 minutes later, a brand new altar had been erected on the deck of the sun ship, which had come to a sudden stop. However, this did not look like a ritual to pray for power from a certain hell powerhouse. It was not serious and cold, and there was no blood sacrifice or sacrifice. At best, it was just a communication device. Then, Huaisher threw 2 origin crystals and a handful of calamity coins on it. "Okay, it's about time to start." He turned back and said to Odom, "As for how to disguise yourself as an ordinary hell creature, I don't need to teach you more, right?" I understand. Odom waved his tentacles excitedly. "As long as you don't let me eat tigers, I'm good at pretending to be a pig." "Very good." Huaisher nodded to express his encouragement, then picked up the rust snail and placed it on the altar's sacrificial spot. Odom was not nervous at all. Instead, his 2 big eyes were filled with anticipation as he began to wait. Then, Huaisher thought for a moment and rubbed 3 welding rods to act as incense sticks. The entire altar at least looked a little more proper. Then, he shook his body and quickly bent his body. His face protruded, and he turned into a dog-headed person that was commonly seen everywhere in hell like a pest. He devoutly prostrated himself in front of the altar. He opened his arms. He called out affectionately, "Great Paradise, Lord of the world's joy and beautiful dreams, your humble believer calls here, praying for your majestic appearance to descend, praying for your profound wisdom to guide me, praying for your infinite power to show me." He was starting to summon people. Following his impassioned chanting, the alchemy array lit up layer by layer. Through the connection of the sun ship, the high-power antenna was outputted, penetrating the fog at the edge of the scar area. Then, the broadcast of the source form spread out in the noisy hell. Following the operation of the antenna, Huaisher carefully adjusted the knob in her hand, locking on to the resonance of paradise on her body. She repeatedly searched through the layers and finally landed on a remote place in the withered area where there was no one. And a suspicious gaze followed the call of the secret device and looked at this place from afar. Suspiciously it looked around. Behind the shielding device, everyone was on high alert. They held their breaths and let the gaze sweep past them like air. There were no signs of abnormalities, until the gaze hidden behind the scenes confirmed that there was no danger. Then, a deep shadow slowly appeared on the altar. The voice was cold and majestic, like a king from the dark abyss, with a disdainful aura. He asked calmly, "Who is it calling for majesty, F***CK?" The moment the shadow appeared, Huaisher stepped on the altar and stepped forward. He directly grabbed the head of the shadow and pulled with all his might. Following his action, the whale-catching harpoon that was ready to be shot on the sun ship roared and shot out. The source form that had undergone a qualitative change of divinity wrapped around the shadow. In an instant, after penetrating dozens of layers, it forcefully wrapped around the shadow's body and dragged it here. "Descend." After a loud roar, the altar collapsed. Kitten, who was smoking with his legs crossed, smashed into the secret device together with the chair under his butt. Layers of binding, entangling, and suppressing him. Then, countless guns and cannons were aimed at his face. On the tattered ragdoll clothes, the originally satisfied smile froze on the spot. "Big brother, spare me, wait!" Before he could react, Kitten subconsciously raised his hands and screamed, "I don't know why sure, you've got it wrong. I'm just Lou. Wait." He paused for a moment, sensing that something was amiss. His gaze swept across the crowd, and finally landed on the kobold. He was suspicious. "Who are you?" In the silence, the kobold slowly removed his disguise and said expressionlessly, "The one you just said you don't know." Dead silence. Half of Kitten's cigarette ash fell on his chin and burned a new black spot. "Ah, this," He coughed awkwardly, looked around, and put on an indignant and accusatory expression. Why sure, you're not being nice. Hurry up and let go of me. We've been friends for so many years, and you're still letting me fish? I can't help it. Why sure moved a chair over and sat in front of him. He didn't look like he was going to let go of Kitten at all. He just asked curiously, if I don't use some tricks, will you be willing to see me? Of course, Kitten answered without hesitation, absolutely not. What a joke. How could others not know? How could he not know how strange Why sure was? Wherever he went, there would be explosions. Whoever he touched would die. Whoever met him would be unlucky. If he touched them, they would die. If he hit them, they would die. Did he really think that the name Disaster Sword was just for show? Back then, not long after he ate one fish for 5 meals, he began to regret it. Why did he have to get involved with this freeloader for the sake of negotiating money? He didn't get many benefits. Instead, he was treated as a freeloader. Even if he applied for an annual card, he couldn't come every day. Back then, he moved quickly and had Yamatai to block the disaster for him. But now, where could he find an unlucky guy to be a scapegoat? Moreover, ever since the name of celestial genealogy became more and more famous in Hell, all the partners began to look at him strangely. I heard that Why sure from the present realm, the one who especially likes to behead people, is from your family? He really wanted to refute with righteous words, but wasn't the crown of the Paradise Prince on Why sure's head given out by the Paradise Prince back then? If he could have known earlier that Why sure was so good at creating things, he would have stopped this matter even if he had to quarrel with the Paradise Prince again. But now, he couldn't even avoid it. The hatred of both sides had been bound now. The entire border between the withered zone and the deep zone was in a mess because of a member of celestial genealogy. So many large groups of people were tortured to death. Rounding up, almost all the famous forces in the abyss were messing with him. In order to avoid the limelight, he could only move again with tears in his eyes. He even endured the pain of closing the 2 branches that had just opened. It was the time when he couldn't make ends meet and had to tighten his belt to live. Otherwise, how could he have fallen to the point where he had to personally come out to extort, the money maker? Thinking of this, his eyes turned red. Unfortunately, the smoke stains were too thick and couldn't be seen at all. Kitten said earnestly, Why sure, at least we had a short-lived marriage. Back then, we were inseparable. Both of us were willing. You can't push me into the fire pit. Look at what you're saying. Aren't we a family? Why sure crossed his legs and said calmly, How can we eat together when there's nothing to do and go our separate ways when there's something to do? Of course, if we die together. Hey, don't go too far. Kitten was so angry that she wanted to hit the table, but she was tied up by the chain and couldn't move. She could only twist her body to express her anger. The road to the Paradise Prince has already been handed over to the new inheritor. Our agreement with celestial genealogy has already been fulfilled. For so many years, we worked so hard to be your custodian and OEM. We paid for the materials ourselves and were responsible for the after-sales. We didn't even ask for a single cent. We just wanted to ride on your popularity. What's wrong with that? You can't just catch a toad and kill it, right? Oh, then this is the second deal. Why sure touched the cigarette ash and said seriously, I, representing celestial genealogy, re-establish an alliance with the Paradise Prince. Kitten shouted angrily, The Paradise Prince is not available. Why sure smiled. Don't you want to hear my conditions? Kitten shook her head decisively. I don't, Dong. Before he finished speaking, a dark silhouette appeared behind him. It was as if a huge city had appeared in layers of fog. A dim rainbow hung from the top of the castle, bringing with it strands of light. It flashed and disappeared. Only the magnificent sound of the bell echoed in the fog and gradually dissipated. Bypassing its chosen agent, the will of the Paradise Prince came here and launched a response. Kitten was furious. Stop it. That's enough. He turned his head, wriggled in the shackles and scolded angrily. Don't you think about it? It's been so many years. Who has cared about us? If I hadn't been so shameless and spent so much money, I wouldn't have been able to live. Now that we've finally been free for a few days, why are you still rushing forward to join in the fun? Isn't it good to have a long memory? Dong. The mighty sound of the bell rang once again in response. Kitten's face twitched. She didn't know if it was from embarrassment or helplessness. She stomped her feet and said, Fine, fine, fine. You guys are all right. I'm the only one who's stingy, okay? Dong. The bell rang again. This time, a gentle force brushed past and unlocked Kitten's shackles. It even stuffed a new cigarette into the corner of her mouth, lit it, and patted her on the shoulder. It was as if she was gently comforting her. Kitten smoked silently. After a long time, she snorted twice, put out the cigarette, and looked at Huaishur. Tell me, what are your conditions? He said coldly, let's be frank. Take out something real. Don't make empty promises and trick us unlucky people into working for you for free, okay? I've had enough of the Republic. Huaishur thought for a moment and solemnly promised. Then, how about letting the theme parks open everywhere? Kitten immediately snorted and sneered. She glanced at Huaishur. If cultivation bases are so easy to earn, why are those rulers fighting the War of the Worlds? Don't you care about your face? Do you think we'll open it just because you say so? Yes. Huaishur nodded and told her, we'll open it just because I say so. Kitten's expression instantly stiffened. Huaishur's words were still going on. Ingzhou, Dongxia, America, the Russian Federation, Rome. Kitten, other than Egypt, you can open it anywhere you want. Donbua has already prepared the land. If you hadn't been afraid of trouble during this period of time and avoided me like the plague, the theme park would have started operating long ago. I won't make empty promises to you, nor will I make any promises to you that can't be fulfilled. But now, if you're willing to go to the lobby, I can give you the entire Las Vegas. At that time, it doesn't matter how many carousels and roller coasters you want to build. Even if you cover the entire city in the theme park, I can help you do it. 3 years. He raised his finger and promised. In 3 years at most, the correction value you earn will be enough for the theme park to temporarily get rid of the influence of solidification and return to your original appearance. Without waiting for Kitten to answer, Huaishur leaned closer and asked in a low voice, Think about it, Kitten. How many years have you not been in the sun? How many years have you not appeared in your original appearance? This opportunity is right in front of you. He said, as long as you say the word. In the brief silence, the kitten's hands trembled slightly. There was a moment when she seemed to be tempted, but then she forced herself to put on an indifferent look and snorted, Just this little thing, and you want to, dong. The low and deep sound of the bell rang again. He interrupted him. Hey, I'm talking business here. Can you stay out of it? Kitten turned around and shouted angrily, Brothers, we should settle accounts clearly. Her voice came to an abrupt stop. At that moment, her movements froze on the spot and she began to twitch violently. A huge will gradually squeezed into her body and took over everything by force. Like a dying old man on a hospital bed, Kitten opened her mouth and let out a slow and hoarse voice, telling him, These are not important. In the short silence, Huaishur was stunned. He felt the source substance surging in Kitten's body at this moment. It was so weak, so painful. It was like struggling with difficulty in a quagmire, holding tightly onto a straw, but it no longer had the strength to get up. I can promise more. Huaishur replied, but I need time to complete it. Those things are not important. Kitten, no, the will of the paradise raised its head with difficulty. As if it was talking in a dream, it told him, laughter, children, and hugs and flowers. When it made a sound, its eyes seemed to light up with the light of the past. In the midsummer of the past, the bright sunshine seemed to be eternal. Colorful balloons floated in the blue sky, just like the bubbles of a fairy tale. Roller coasters, balls, floats, and merry-go-rounds. The children ran excitedly in the square, dancing and holding the hands of the smiling dolls. Laughter could be heard. Everything was as beautiful as a never-ending dream. But those distant dreams had long since passed away. Along with the joy, the paradise was no longer there. Thus, in the empty eyes, turbid tears slowly flowed down. "Want to see?" It murmured hoarsely, as if it was begging, looking at Why Sure. Everyone, once again, laughed together. In the silence, Why Sure did not speak. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. After a long time, he nodded vigorously. "I'll do it," Why Sure said. "Definitely." At that moment, a gratified smile appeared on the kitten's face. It closed its eyes. The bell rang. In the midst of this high-pitched cry in the distance, Why Sure's secret instrument began to tremble violently and crack. But the connection to the distance was not broken. Just behind the kitten, the void suddenly became turbulent. It was as if a behemoth was hissing and doing its best to open up a gap. It did not hesitate to turn itself into a bridge and open the door. Behind the gate, the silent paradise lit up with the light of an illusion again. The merry-go-round sang and ran again. 7 colors appeared on the Ferris wheel, spinning like a sun wheel. Dim fireworks rose into the sky and bloomed brightly for an instant. The gate of the castle opened with a bang. Countless figures emerged from behind the door. When the sound of countless footsteps overlapped, it turned into a roar that shook the whole world. Along the bridge that led to the other side, they moved forward, cheering and singing gentle carols. The parade of floats that belonged to the paradise began again. They went to their own battlefield. "Remember your promise, Why Sure." The kitten raised its head and conveyed the will of its creator to the sublimator in front of it. "From now on, the paradise will be with you. Kitten, you can witness everything with your own eyes." Why Sure nodded and told it, "Our contract will not end until we die." Chapter 1060. Present State Dongxia. There was no sunlight under the gloomy sky. In the darkness, there was only the sound of thunder. Dazzling lightning was brewing in the pitch-black clouds. The heavy rain continued to fall from the sky, but the low sound of rain did not spread out. This was because there was an even more soul-shaking sound in front of them. The river. The surging river surged rapidly under the dam. The turbid yellow river water could not be seen at first glance. There was only darkness in the depths. Even the huge searchlights could not light it up. In this extremely bad situation, helicopters kept roaring past. On the road between the hills in the distance, an endless convoy was trudging through the mud. The weight of the large amount of soil and stone caused the wheels to sink deep into the mud. Accompanied by uniform shouts, the young people's faces were flushed red. They used all their strength to push the trucks forward bit by bit with difficulty. There were even more people running around inside and outside the makeshift camp. They patrolled up and down the dam that was dozens of kilometers long. At the very front, a young man with unkempt hair and a dirty face was sitting on top of a sandbag, holding a bowl of noodle soup in his hand. Slurp. The noodle soup and noodles that could not be considered delicious were mixed into a ball and stuffed into his stomach. There was no sign of the dignity of the Jinling Social Security Bureau's director. He also did not have his usual charm and bearing. He looked like a homeless man. However, even a homeless man looked much better than the others around him. It was as if they had just climbed out of a quagmire. Those people were covered in water and mud. They lay on the blanket on the ground. Some of them were still holding bowls in their hand. They had already begun to sleep and snoring. Unless the assembly signal sounded again, no matter how deafening the thunder was, it would not wake them up. Under this simple shelter, cold rain was still sent in by the cold wind from time to time, landing on their faces and heads. "Is it raining heavily again?" Chu Hongchen wiped his face and put the bowl in his arms. Occasionally, when he looked at the vast river in front of him, His eyes gradually turned cold. Under the illumination of the searchlights, the turbid muddy water surged forward. In the wide river, impurities and sand were constantly surging. Those blurry shadows gathered together, as if forming a shadow that stretched for thousands of miles. It appeared and disappeared from time to time. However, at that moment, the shadow was blocked before the dam. No matter how hard he struggled, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to break through the final line of defense. It's a big snake. Chu Hongchen smacked his lips and bit his chopstick. He sighed vaguely. The dragon gate is right in front of you, but you can't cross it. You must be furious, right? Thunder exploded. It was like the angry roar of a giant beast. In the river, the blurry shadow spasmed again. Its formless body stirred up the current, causing the alarm to sound even more piercing. That was the so-called snake. No, it wouldn't be too much to call it a dragon sin, right? For a farming nation like the Eastern Xia, since ancient times, the rivers and rivers were the embodiment of hope and life. It was precisely because there was an endless supply of water that more land could be irrigated, more plants could be cultivated, and more people could be raised. It was because of this that a totem like the dragon existed. If the countless towering mountains were the bones of the dragon's veins, then the complex water system that covered the entire Eastern Xia was the body of the dragon. The endless rivers were like blood, covering the entire country. Wherever it passed, all living things grew. This was the dragon. It was this generous gift from the dragon that allowed countless lives to flourish and flourish. The so-called dragon's veins were like this. Mountains, rivers, earth, and people were indispensable. If the dragon was the one that nourished all living things and gave life, then this uncontrollable power and overflowing torrent was no different from a snake. The battle between dragons and snakes had never stopped since ancient times. It could be foreseen that it would continue into the future. Now, the climate disaster that the flute player had brought to the world had already appeared. It was not only a drought and a storm. What it had brought out was this disaster that had been silent for many years. When the material disaster combined with this silent disaster, it would bring the slumbering serpent back to life from nothingness and evolve into countless evil creatures. It was not just at this moment. Here, a war that spread throughout the entire Eastern Xia had begun a month ago. There was no smoke in the battle between humans and natural disasters. There was only thunder and the roars of countless people under the storm, as well as the battle between the disaster serpents that longed to become dragons and the Eastern Xia lineage in the shadows. Under the shelter, Mo-san, who was wearing a raincoat, hurried back. The fierce battle with the water monsters had consumed too much of his energy. The fire attribute Stigmata was especially disgusted with this kind of weather. Even his face looked a bit pale. After coming in, he sat down on a cushion, unable to get up. Yuan Zhao, give me a cup of water. Yuan Zhao. Where's that kid Yuan Zhao? She looked around and frowned. Isn't he supposed to be your guard? Did he skip work again? Chu Hongchen held back his laughter and pointed below the dam. There, isn't that him? Mo-san narrowed his eyes. In the mud, among the figures moving back and forth, he searched for a long time before finding the young man covered in mud. He was carrying a sandbag the size of a small mountain on his shoulder as he hurriedly ran behind the formation. His originally handsome face was covered in mud and his hair was a mess. It was impossible to tell that it was him. Mo-san's expression looked a bit better, but he was still a bit unhappy. Is this kid going crazy again? I arranged it. Chu Hongchen replied. I'm a piece of trash that can't carry anything. I can only sit in the camp and slack. Why would I need a guard? I might as well go down and be useful. But that kid is much more reliable than before. He's been running around like an animal for 2 days and he hasn't complained. He's grown up. Mo-san's expression became slightly gratified. Children will grow up. Isn't this much better than his sloppy appearance? That's right. Chu Hongchen nodded in agreement, his eyes filled with sympathy. Unfortunately, in the world of adults, it's not only age that will increase, the amount of work will also increase. He actually has time to pee? Later, get someone to give him more work. Emo-san didn't say anything. Everyone in the Social Security Bureau already acknowledged that although Big Cousin was considerate when he was considerate, when he wasn't a person, he didn't seem like a person at all. Unfortunately, when he wasn't a person, there were more times than when he was considerate. It caused the girls to privately discuss whether this was a new type of PUA method. "How's the situation upstream?" Chu Hongchen asked. "It's still very tense." Emo-san took a breath and replied, "The rainfall is still rising. The water level is about to reach its highest point in history. Keep an eye on it. Have everyone stay alert. Floods, droughts, plagues, everything is tense. We can't lose face at this juncture." Chu Hongchen emphasized again. "If something goes wrong, the losses will be incalculable." Emo-san nodded solemnly. He thought for a moment and comforted, "The entire realm is tense. No matter what, we're better than those people who maintain the system." "Can't you learn a bit?" Chu Hongchen rolled his eyes and didn't mention this topic. He only asked, "What did Rain Master and Wind Count say?" "They're trying to disperse the clouds, but it's not very effective. The rainfall upstream is really too high," Emo-san said softly. "When I came here, I heard people say that it's better to just take out Hanba's authoritative relic." When Chu Hongchen heard this, he stopped eating and raised his head. His expression became even more solemn. "You think so too? I'm not in charge of using my brain. What's the point of thinking about this? Some people just think too much." Chu Hongchen sneered. "In order to solve a temporary emergency, to indirectly increase the degree of distortion. What's the difference between that and drinking poison to quench thirst?" Authoritative relics weren't just terrifying in power. If that kind of thing wasn't handled well, there would be no end of trouble. Not only would it waste correction points, it would also indirectly increase the burden on the realm. Once Hanba appeared, there would be a 1,000-mile drought. The floods would be gone, but there would be problems with food production for the next decade or so. When that time came, not only the cabinet, but even the Continuation Academy, who came to clean up the mess, would be cursing. For so many years, everyone had abided by an unspoken rule. That was the restraint treaty of authoritative relic. Unless there was a large-scale distortion accident, they would never use that kind of thing in the realm. Chu Hongchen took out his phone and glanced at the list on it. He began to make arrangements. It seems that old man Suanio has been too busy recently and didn't pay attention to ideological construction. As a result, some people began to slide when he didn't care. Later, I'll have to open a few more classes and learn more. After the education, they would be sent to the border to work for a few years. Then, they would know the importance of things. If they were still useless, then they would sit on the bench until they died. At this critical juncture, everything is tense. We have a big family and a big business. Don't be like a pauper who only knows how to gamble. We have to do what needs to be done. Don't do what you shouldn't do. Some people just didn't know how extravagant it was to do things properly. They liked to gamble whenever they had the chance. If they won, they wouldn't earn much. If they lost, they would suffer heavy losses. What were they after? Chu Hongchen shook his head and dispelled the irrelevant thoughts. He asked, "What about Kwafu? He didn't slip away, did he?" "Although I'm not sure, he knows the importance of things." "Don't worry," Emo-san replied. "According to your instructions, I told him before coming that I hope to bring you along during the next social gathering. Stay in the eye of the sea obediently and don't move." According to Suanio's arrangements, Bai Zhe is still in Yenjing and won't move. Di Ting is still arguing with the Russian Federation and India. The old lady of the Qing Emperor is still in the northwest. Gao Chen seems to have other things to do and is nowhere to be seen. She paused for a moment and sighed helplessly. If old Fu and little White. Before she finished speaking, she noticed Chu Hongchen's serious gaze and stopped talking. This kind of thing can't be solved by one more person or one less person. Dongxia, Rome, Egypt, America. Everyone is having a hard time. It's unrealistic to expect one person or one method to solve so many problems. We can only take it slow and steady. Chu Hongchen lowered his head and stirred the dry dough in the porcelain jar. He stuffed it into his mouth and wiped the corner of his mouth. Let's endure. He looked at the rolling turbid current in front of him and the phantom of a huge snake that stretched for thousands of miles. He was expressionless. Let's see who can endure who. No one responded. There was only the raging river under the towering dam. In the distance, at the edge of another dam, beside the rolling turbid current, water splashed. A piece of old waterproof cloth was propped up. The firewood burned vigorously in the high stove, causing the fragrance under the pot lid to grow stronger. The rain is beating on the pear blossoms, and the mud has fallen to the ground. Send the little red lady to Jian Shixiang, and the Eastern Pavilion will hold a banquet to get over the shock. Beside the boiling soup pot, an old man sat on a chair and looked at the river. He smoked and hummed an old melody leisurely. After the lid was lifted, the sweet fragrance of the eel soup spread out. Not only did it make the passers-by within a radius of several hundred meters swallow their saliva, even the rolling torrent seemed to be surging with shadows that were moving closer and closer. It was difficult to hide the thirst. The old man scooped a spoonful for himself unhurriedly. He took a sip and frowned slightly. It's still a little bland. Forget it, I'll make do. Little monkeys, stop looking. Come and eat. He knocked on the side of the pot and waved at the young people, who were quietly poking their heads out from under the canopy not far away. The young people hesitated for a moment and looked at the class monitor behind them. The class monitor squatted by the side and smoked. He glared at them angrily. Why are you looking at me? Look at the discipline. Do you still have any discipline? There are also pancakes, the old man added. Hot. The class monitor's expression twitched, and his stomach began to growl. He had not eaten yet. I'm a handyman in the cooking class, the old man finally said with a smile, not part of the crowd. Give me a bowl. In the silence, the class monitor's hands trembled as he took out his lunchbox. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. There was no other way. The soup was too fragrant. Soon, the pot of thick soup and 2 baskets of pancakes disappeared into the hungry young people's mouth. Before the horn was blown, the class monitor returned the stack of money and the basket. Thank you, sir. You should leave as soon as you're done. It's too dangerous here. I heard the water level will rise again in a while. Okay, you guys go. I know. The old man nodded and smiled. This pot of soup is not ready yet. I need to simmer it for a while. The class monitor wanted to say something, but there was no time. He left behind a handcart and hurried away. Not far away, Yuan Zhao, who was sniffing the remaining fragrance, peeked his head out. When he saw the stooped figure, he slipped and almost fell into the mud. He subconsciously shrunk his head and wanted to slip away. But the old man seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. He waved his hand. Hey, Yuan Zhao, come here. Yuan Zhao froze in place. After a long time, he reluctantly moved over. He nodded and bowed, squeezed out a smile, and tried to flatter. Uncle Zong, how are you? Yes, I'm very good. The old man smiled and nodded. What a coincidence. I need a few fish to make soup. You look very good. As if he could see the trembling dragon horse stigmata, the old man smiled and asked the obvious. Young man, how's your swimming skill? Suddenly, there was silence. Yuan Zhao looked at the old man's pot of soup, and then looked at the bottomless turbid current next to it. There were countless huge shadows swimming in it. He swallowed his saliva. Suddenly, he had an ominous premonition. and when the old man lifted the huge fishing rod that was big enough to hang a person, tears finally rushed out. With such a big bait, there must be something good on the hook, right? Just like that, in the midst of the screams, Gwashuk smiled and cast the fishing rod. He was full of expectations. Chapter 1061. In the Russian Federation, at the edge of the Caucasus Mountains, there was a loud crash coming from afar. But it couldn't be heard clearly. In the distance, there seemed to be an earth-shattering wave surging, but it couldn't be seen clearly. The entire world seemed to be drowned in a suffocating paleness. The only thing that could be seen was endless flying snow. Thick snowflakes fluttered down from the sky. It had been a week. The bone-chilling cold seeped into the body through the lungs, making the soul feel sluggish. The thick coats were soaked by the snow and quickly froze. It was like wearing a thick layer of armor, making it difficult for people to move. When the whole world became pale, the countless figures on the ground also became small. They were like struggling black dots, moving forward with difficulty along the railway covered by layers of snow. The high-pitched loudspeaker kept urging them to move forward. But it didn't travel far before it was swallowed by the flying snow. All that could be heard was the tired panting of the people beside them, the dull sound of shovels piercing into the snow, and the high-pitched sound of pickaxes colliding with the ice, faster, faster. A hobbling old man dragged his lame leg, and held the loudspeaker in his hand. He shouted to the people in front of him, "It's been 16 hours since the snow disaster. This batch of supplies must be sent over." But in this bustling and noisy chaos, a stumbling figure rushed over. The middle-aged man's face was pale, and his beard was covered in white frost. His numb face kept twitching. "We can't dig any more, Walia. We can't dig any more," he shouted hoarsely. "We're running out of time. We must retreat. We must immediately. Are you King seeing a ghost?" The old man was furious. His spittle sprayed on the man's face. "Do you know how important our mission is? There's an avalanche." The man, who had been a hunter for 16 years at the edge of the mountains, was almost crying. "That sound just now, it's an avalanche, it definitely is. It'll be too late when we see it. We must retreat or else will King continue." In this world of ice and snow, the old man's eyes were burning red. "Vanya, if you're cold, I have wine here. If you're hungry, there's toast in the dining car behind. If you're sleepy, go to bed. I can give you 2 more fucking hours of sleep. But you can't tell me we're stopping." The old man grabbed him by the collar and roared like a lion. "Mitrofan has been without power for 4 hours. There are hundreds of pregnant women in the hospital there and dozens of seriously ill patients. Their generators can only last for 8 more hours. After 8 hours, if no one comes to save them, they will all die. Even if there's an avalanche, we might not die, but if we run away, they'll all be finished, you know? It's all over." Ivan was dumbfounded. He stared at him for a long time, panting and not saying anything. Being stared at by that pair of eyes, he couldn't say anything. After a long time, he staggered back and sat on the ground, sobbing tiredly. "I still have a daughter. She's only 4 years old. 4 years old, Valia. If I can't go back, what will happen to her?" The sound of snow being shoveled and ice being knocked did not stop. Everyone was silent, suppressing the urge to roar. Their faces were red with anger as the cold wind blew. It was as if they wanted to tear the world apart. But in his sorrowful cries, there was a warm smell of incense. "Poor child, he's just scared." The skinny priest in black stood in front of him, lowering his head and looking at him. In the priest's hand, the incense ball burned silently, spreading warmth in the cold world. "Don't be afraid." The priest's face twitched, as if he was trying hard to squeeze out a kind expression. But in contrast with his excessively thin face, it looked even weirder. "You will go back." He dipped his finger in some holy oil and gently smeared it on Ivan's forehead, assuring him, "I just came back from there, Ivan. There's no avalanche. You just misheard. Misheard? Ivan was dumbfounded. Yes, the engineering team in front is blowing up some collapsed rocks, the priest said in a hoarse voice. You will see your child, Ivan. Your child will lie in front of the window next to the fireplace, waiting for you to come back. When the time comes, you have to tell her everything you did like a hero. He thought for a moment and said with certainty, Everyone will go back, I promise you. Ivan was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but shed tears in front of that face that couldn't be called benevolent. Please continue with your work, everyone. The priest, who had appeared out of nowhere, bowed his head and said, The Holy Spirit will definitely protect you. Just like that, holding the incense ball in his hand, the skinny priest chanted scriptures in a low voice, calmly blessing everyone. Once again, he walked into the snowstorm. In the distance, and even further, the sacred flag was faintly visible in the snow, and the chants spread. Even more priests were trekking across the wasteland, as if they were on a pilgrimage. They formed long queues that were separated from each other. Above the mountains, the rolling bleak white froze in the air, and the rumbling stopped. Those lonely figures were like nails wedged into the ground, fixing the collapsing avalanche in place, unable to move an inch forward. After a long time, everything returned to silence. The priest turned back and took a last look at the specks of light that were struggling to move forward after the snow filled the sky. He bowed his head and gave his last blessing. In front of him, the priest who was waiting reminded him, Isai, let's go. Yes. Isai turned back. I'm coming. Just like that, they turned and moved forward again, disappearing at the end of the snowstorm. The storm continued. The mission also continued. Above the dry Nile River in Egypt, the smell of mud and decay floated. Outside the oasis, thousands of miles of sand danced. The brutal sunlight shrouded the sky and sprinkled down, torturing everything in the thirst. Countless stray water vapor was swept away by the dry wind, flying into the distance. It had been 2 weeks in a row, but there was no rain. Outside the city, amidst the sandstorm, countless pyramids were silent in the shadows. In the deepest darkness, amidst the erosion of endless disasters, the pharaoh slowly opened his mouth and let out a soft sound. It was like a long sigh. It was also like a soft moan that came from the gap between countless nightmares. The hand holding the scepter was as thin as firewood, but it never let go. It was as if he was holding the reins of the country. He used so much strength. Blood that was as thick as asphalt flowed down from his hand, along the scepter, and flowed into the trajectory of the secret instrument. Thus, the layer of rainbow light that enveloped the entire territory appeared again. Like a thin fetal membrane protecting a baby, it enveloped the entire territory and border, sending down strands of sweet rain. Once again, the sandstorm within thousands of miles was smoothed out. And thousands of miles away, in India, countless pitch-black tides were like an iron curtain. Under the push of the out-of-control ocean currents, they rose and fell one after another, roaring towards the land that was silent in the long night. However, at the edge of the land, something was slowly rising. The hazy and blurry outline was projected in the night, but the sense of existence was so strong. It was as if only that mark was the core of the entire world, the meaning of all life and existence, and the destination of all things destruction. Countless pitch-black tsunamis surged and roared. When they collided with each other, an earth-shattering roar erupted. However, all the loud sounds were suppressed by the low sound of drums. They gradually shattered and became difficult to hear. That was someone stepping on the ground, taking light and vigorous dance steps. Above the sky, the dark clouds shattered, and a ray of pure moonlight shone down, illuminating the half-naked middle-aged man. His face was covered in oil paint, solemn and ancient. His curly long hair fell from his shoulders, swaying like the darkness itself. At this moment, the wind howled, and the sound of a flute was actually played. In the raging sea, There was the sound of waves spreading, like the pious praise of souls. He was dancing, circling and stepping on the empty beach, as if he was imitating the former great god, reappearing his divine might. No, that was the great god himself, the reflection of the former divine being in the world. When he danced, all living things were intoxicated by this figure that contained endless profundities. Endless ascetic practices and prayers spread through his every movement. Unknowingly, the waves of the sea slowly stopped. But he still didn't stop. His eyes were lowered. He just danced in a daze, as if he would never stop. It wasn't just here. It wasn't just here. East Asia, the Russian Federation, Egypt, Rome, America, India. After the sun set, the world that sank into the dark side was still full of noise and turmoil. Under the push of an invisible hand, the waves of disaster spread in the world behind the high wall, triggering layers of ripples of decay. But outside the high wall, there was still endless darkness rising. On the endless sea, the distant outline from the abyss gradually became clear. Under the depth, black sails fluttered, and a ferocious hull made of bones and the fingernails of the dead broke through the shackles. Countless ships of the dead dragged ropes, and their journey never ended. In the deep tide, the Najilfa fleet slowly rose. Just like this, they dragged the huge fallen country from the dark side of the abyss and gradually floated up. On the other side of the border, it was dark. Like a layer of dark clouds, the eternal thunderclouds shrouded the huge palace like a living creature riding the tide. Just passing by, they cast a shadow that covered the sky and the sun between hell. Above the black clouds, thousands of streaks of lightning spread out like meridians, constantly flapping. They were like wings of lightning stirring up hell, resisting the pull from the abyss. Under the will of the dwarf kings, the sea of thunder spread its wings and soared, flying toward the present. There were also bizarre giant fishes swaying their bodies, forming a colorful and majestic torrent. They kept converging like a school of fish that followed the ocean currents in search of reproduction. Wherever they passed, they would plant their own seeds between the layers of hell, using calamity to hatch endless offspring. Then, they were all devoured by the mouth of the abyss that chased after them. The pitch-black holy light rose from the depths of the abyss, and the hymns from the blessed land spread between the disasters. The outline of the rancher's temple appeared in the observation mirror. There was more. Countless faces tore at each other, a distorted monster formed by layers of tails of giant rats, an endless sea of flowers that was enchanting and beautiful, and more countless hells collided with each other in the tide, and endless darkness floated up from the abyss. They could not wait to crawl. They were roaring and singing fervently. They were marching toward the world that was favored by light. The silent stage was finally about to welcome a new performance, and in the deepest part of hell, at the end of the layers of labyrinths, on the throne in the shadows, the thinker with 10,000 eyes bowed his head and looked at everything with a smile. Just like the audience in the first-class seats, he waited quietly. However, occasionally, his gaze would shift to another direction, landing on the scar that was filled with fog, and his gaze would become playful and curious. This was a rare pastime in the past. Before everything officially began, there was still a good show to watch. And how would the actors who came on stage, under the mockery of fate, choose? However, it was still too slow. The rhythm was too slow, and there was always a little bit more to go. The Pied Piper smiled, raised a finger, and pointed. He gave a revelation to his jester. Chapter 1062. In the long map, Hades, who was deep in thought, suddenly raised his hand. The feeling of nothingness spread in the air and landed on the depth map. The invisible fingers touched the ups and downs and positions on the map, tracing the route and traces left behind by the prey. Just now, the water mirror of the fallen country had captured the fluctuations of the source substance of a large secret instrument. It was in the scar area. The minister's mind raced as he began to think again. They wanted to rely on the environment of the scar area to shake off their pursuers? To stall for more time? Or did they want to launch another counterattack? Was this overestimation of their abilities or confidence? But he kept feeling that something was wrong. Seeing that the enemy had entered a dead end and did not turn back, he did not dare to relax or mock them in the slightest. Instead, he became more vigilant and uneasy. What did they want to do at the critical juncture of the War of the Worlds? What did Huaishur want to do? The scar area? Celestial genealogy? Those remnants of the utopia. Suddenly, a strange feeling rose from Hades's heart. Faint ripples spread in his thoughts, bringing about an indescribable understanding. In the pair of pitch-black eye sockets, a dark flame faintly appeared. So that's how it is? There must be something there. Something that made the celestial genealogy not hesitate to go deep into hell at this juncture, no matter how many opponents they provoked, no matter how many enemies were chasing behind them, they would not hesitate to go deep into the land of death to find something. A relic of authority? A miracle engraving? Or was it the treasure of the utopia? It did not matter. The moment this realization surfaced in his mind, the last trace of gloominess silently dissipated, replaced by an unwavering determination. In the dark, Hades grinned. A silent, sinister smile. "Go and tell Golden Dawn." He ordered his subordinates, "Have them send the route of the stairway to heaven over. I want the highest specification, one that can resist the interference of the scar area and go deep into it." He wanted Golden Dawn to build a door for himself that could cross several depths and directly reach the deepest part of the scar area. But, we don't have that many resources." The subordinate was stunned. As the builders of the stairs to hell, those lunatics were not the most benevolent of people. At this critical moment, any urgent route had to be charged dozens of times more than usual. Even if it didn't lead to the present realm, it was still the same. "Don't worry, I won't pay." Hades turned around and said coldly to the air, "You want it for free, and you also want to provide me with at least 4 additional legions. Otherwise, from now on, we will stop all actions, and watch as your eternal enemy rises once again." "Just as you wish." Before the subordinate could reply, a figure that shouldn't exist appeared in the darkness. The sound of the cane hitting the ground was crisp and clear. Mathers smiled and adjusted his hat. "Although I don't have an army, I'm sure my creation will satisfy your appetite." Behind him, the silhouette of a giant beast slowly rose from the boiling shadows. Its huge wings instantly tore the sky apart, and dozens of legions were shrouded in that strange shadow. The monster that was bred from the blood of the abyss had appeared. Then, in the depths of the dark abyss, the land of dreams that floated between the abyss glowed, and a stairway to heaven descended from the distant hell. In an instant, the fog was torn apart. The dazzling light paved the way like polar neon, leading Huaishur and the others to death. "How far are we?" On the sun ship, Huaishur suddenly raised his head. Now, the sun ship that was operating at full power was galloping above hell. The waves of the Styx River spread out like a phantom, sweeping across the barren world. Only afterimages were left behind. Odom closed his eyes and sensed for a moment before replying, "With the current speed, it will take about 4 hours. There's no time." Huaishur shook his head and felt the rapidly rising intuition of death. He decisively connected to the bridge. "Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Our enemy is about to arrive." Not only Raymond on the bridge, but also Gregory, Forster, and even Anton raised their heads in their cabins. Soon, the low sound of steel rubbing against each other spread from every corner of the sun ship. In the darkness, pairs of bloodthirsty eyes slowly lit up. "Wait, there's nothing ahead." Odom was stunned. Through the perception of countless rust snails, he could sense the shadows and terror left in this empty fog, guiding them to avoid the trap. At the same time, he also monitored the tracks of the pursuers. Among them, even the closest was still a long distance away, but then, the eyes at all depths caught a glimpse of the rainbow light that was flying towards them. Stairway to heaven? He was silent for a moment, and his tone became complicated. They really put in a lot of effort. At this moment, the depth of the disturbance in the scar area no longer changed rapidly. Under the shroud of the rainbow light, the originally ambiguous and blurry chaotic zones quickly fell into calmness. The secret instrument of the same origin as the Rainbow Bridge operated in the abyss, stirring up a massive amount of disasters, tearing apart the eternally dim sky above their heads, and colorful auroras spread out. Immediately after, countless figures descended from the sky. It was like a rainstorm. Under the guidance of the stairway to heaven, the legions and enemies wandering in the fog were constantly projected in front of them. They were even enveloped in it, tearing apart the waves of the Nether River and entangling the Sun ship, causing their progress to gradually become sluggish. Speed up. On the bridge, Huaishur saw the dark shadows on the screen, but he couldn't see any high-threat targets at all. They were all cannon fodder. All departments get ready, but don't rush to make a move, Huaishur said. They want to consume our time and energy. It was like a hunter chasing his prey, continuously releasing hounds, forcing the enemy to flee in a panic, while he crawled into a blind spot. Then, he would slowly raise his gun barrel, kill all the opponents and capture Huaishur alive. On the ground, among the countless enemies, a group of mousemen excitedly raised the bone weapons in their hands while drooling. Their eyes were already bloodshot under the effect of stimulants. But before they could excitedly rush to their opponents, they saw a towering silhouette tearing apart the thin fog. The huge armored warship pushed forward with a loud bang. The terrifying mass ravaged and destroyed everything in front of it. The blood-stained gully quickly spread forward. The excited shouts were instantly replaced by shouts of horror. Under the cover of the dark shadow, there was no way to escape. The Sun ship sped through it as if it was entering an uninhabited land. But at this moment, everyone's heart gradually sank. The darkness formed by countless enemies seemed to have no end at all. It was like a real ocean. No matter how the Sun ship kept flashing and advancing, it still couldn't escape its range. Is there a way to dive deep? Huaishur asked. Yes, but I'm afraid the other side can't wait for us to do so. Raymond gritted his teeth, and the expression of the giant knight gradually turned ferocious. Faint electric sparks burst out from the gaps of his teeth along with the friction of his teeth. What the sticks needed to unfold was a relatively stable depth condition. Once it was slightly disturbed by the heaven ladder during this process, the entire Sun ship would be torn apart by the huge change in depth. Self-disintegration. Even if it was a large support vehicle, it still had its limit. Its body was too large, and it couldn't produce a strong depth field like Anubis of the same level, allowing it to warp freely within 6 depths at any time. Hell finally revealed its most ferocious side to them. Endless cheap monsters were rapidly catalyzed and bred by the disaster. Under the control of the heaven ladder, they were thrown to the battlefield. Gradually, the smooth road turned into a quagmire, and the cold, murderous intent was hidden among the endless opponents. The radar suddenly set off an ear-piercing sound. High-energy reaction. The red dragon roared. In the distance, among the countless ratmen, mutants that were dozens of meters tall and covered in sutures suddenly appeared. They were also from the large group of ratmen from Hell, but at this moment, they had an aura that was completely different from their compatriots. Not only were their huge bodies swollen to the point of being stupefied, but also the thick water that constantly seeped out of their limbs and the mutated organs that were completely unrelated to ratmen. That was the Black Death Army. A freak bred from hundreds of millions of ratmen, a huge monster created after countless surgeries and sutures. At this moment, under the pull of the sutured giant rats, countless ropes snapped straight, and roars rose and fell one after another. The other end of the rope sank into the ground as if it was tied to something huge, causing the soil on the ground to rapidly churn. In the end, a giant white bone cannon that was several meters tall was pulled out of the mud out of thin air. A huge amount of blood rolled over from the surroundings and poured into the cannon, turning into a huge rotten crystal that flew out of the giant white bone cannon. Accompanied by a loud rumble, the origin substance displacement shield around Sun's ship faintly appeared. A dazzling firework exploded in the void. However, the high temperature did not spread. Instead, it was replaced by a severe cold. The terrifying cold instantly froze a large number of cannon fodder into stone-like ice sculptures. It's useful. It's useful. At the back, the ecstatic plague warlord spat out pitch-black saliva and screamed, "Go, all of you go! Kill all of these reality realm people for me. When we capture Huai Shur alive, everyone will be given 10 stinky women." He excitedly emphasized, "As stinky as you want, as stinky as you want." Immediately, an ear-piercing horn sounded to convey the warlord's order. A large amount of rotten tail grass was poured into the cannon fodder's mouth, and even more inferior weapons were stuffed into their hands, pushing them in front of Sun's ship. Then, even more sutured giant rats screamed and excitedly pulled the ropes in their hands. The blessing from the ruler, the Rat King, had descended. All treasures are buried in the ground. Gold was like this, silver was like this, bones were like this, death was like this. Under the nourishment of the rat men's blood, all the spoils on the battlefield were offerings to the Rat King. At this moment, there was already a tunnel leading to the rat-man-demon realm in the depths of the earth. Not only were there giant bone cannons and crudely made swords, but when countless ropes were pulled, a large amount of soil was quickly stirred up, and huge towers were pulled out of thin air. The huge siege towers that were pieced together from rotten wood and rusted steel burned with raging flames. Their huge bodies that were dozens of meters tall were not inferior to Sun's ship's height. Even if they were constantly peeling off parts, under the blood-colored water, even more siege towers were pulled out from the ground like crops. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Like submerged reefs that gradually rose from the deep sea, they began to surround Sun's ship. At that moment, on the bridge, Huai Shur expressionlessly raised his finger and knocked on the armrest. Suddenly, the illusion of a huge door slowly rose from the void. The door to the end opened here. Chapter 1063. The moment the shadow spread out, the countless siege towers that had risen from the ground suddenly stopped. With the infusion of the origin substance, the miracle that belonged to Great Sea Ming unfolded. In an instant, it covered the entire area within a few kilometers of Sun's ship. That thin domain did not cause any damage, but it was enough to affect the Rat King's gift. Indeed, there were countless treasures buried in the ground that could create all kinds of tools. But what if the treasures could not be buried in the ground? Most of the blood and death that had been sacrificed to the ruler had been diverted, continuously entering the ultimate and condensing into steel. In the empty warehouse, flames appeared out of nowhere, and crystal iron rapidly grew and multiplied, continuously being sent into the processing chamber through the assembly line. Even if it was a piece of iron made from inferior blood, it could still be put to good use. At this moment, outside, more siege towers that had yet to take shape began to tremble violently. Unable to get enough blood, they died in the womb, or their weak foundation that had barely grown could not support the huge weight. They collapsed with a loud bang. But there were still more siege towers being pulled by countless sutured giant rats on the battlefield. Like a city wall, they piled up and combined with each other in an attempt to stop Sun's ship's advance. Then, they were crushed like dry weeds, turning into wreckage on the ground. But after witnessing all this, the plague warlord did not fly into a rage or become discouraged. Instead, he became more and more overjoyed. "Very good, very good." He swung his tongue and shouted, becoming more and more excited. "You guys did well, you guys did well. Go, go. Hey, what are you guys doing?" Behind him, the expressions of the solidified in the shadows became gloomier. This group of former children of Doomsday, The remnants of the celestial genealogy that had once chased all over hell could no longer tolerate the insolence of Huai Shi and the others. We did not hire you to go through the motions and send you to your deaths. That's right, that's right. The plague warlord was overjoyed. The faster the better, the more the better. Of course, the more the better. In all fairness, were things like the rat men really valuable? Other than being able to give birth, they had no other use. But as long as it could exist in hell and not become food on the table, it must have its own unique use. Even if the quantity reached a certain limit, it would be enough to cause a qualitative change. The living cannot change qualitatively. Even if they're dead, that's fine. At this moment, large amounts of death, destruction, corpses, and blood were rapidly falling onto the dry and barren land. It was completely swallowed by the pitch-black soil. However, when the fragile towers were crushed, new towers rose from the ground. They grew larger, more ferocious, and more berserk. After countless ratmen died, sutured greater rats would crawl out of the mud one after another. A war of attrition. This was a war of attrition that could only be supported by the Rat King's Black Death Corps. As long as there was this land that was constantly filled with blood and death, more and more treasures would grow out of the graves. At this moment, after being destroyed several times, the reborn tower chariot was covered in something that looked like flesh and blood. Its outer layer was covered in a carapace that looked like bones. The degree of difficulty had also changed from the original thin paper to a piece of iron. In fact, it was still increasing with the destruction and rebirth. Don't worry. Since I've taken your money, I'll definitely do a good job for you. The plague warlord said to the employers with a beaming expression, "What is the most important thing in this year? It's credibility. It's service. It's loyalty. Even if you change your requirements 100,000 times, as long as you give enough money, the Black Death Corps will be your best choice. Hey, what are you guys still standing there for? Can't you see that my tea is cold? Pour the tea. Pour the tea." He did not have the slightest arrogance or dignity of a crown wearer. He rubbed his hands and directly snatched the kettle. He poured tea and water for the employers in front of him. Then, he began to skillfully massage their shoulders and legs. At the outermost periphery of the battlefield, the rat men had already built a high platform and occupied the best observation position. They provided the guests with the best viewing experience and the highest standard of service. Even though this service wasn't that good. But the most important thing was the spirit. They were not afraid of hardship, fatigue, or even death. As long as there was enough rotten tail grass for the rats below to chew, they would even dare to stab the ruler twice. Of course, whether they could stab or not and whether the people above had the courage to do so were two different things. But didn't the Black Death Corps rely on their fearless tyranny and their inexhaustible numbers to move unhindered in hell? At this moment, no matter how picky the boss was, when he saw the scene of countless rat men risking their lives to fight, he could not help but praise and give a thumbs up. The originally gloomy expressions of the solidifiers of the children of Doomsday eased a little, and they could not help but nod slightly. "Continue. As long as you can capture Huai Shi, I will give you twice the money." The leader of the solidifiers threw a money bag over. "Whether you can earn it or not depends on your ability." The plague warlord fell to the ground and caught the money bag. When he saw the colorful disaster crystals inside, he became more and more excited. He turned back and shouted, "What are you waiting for? You bunch of trash, fire your cannons! Open fire! Let the uncles hear it!" The sound of the bugle horn rose and fell one after another. More and more white bone cannons poked their heads out of the soil and spewed fire at the sun ship. Huge bone bullets mixed with flesh and blood soared in the sky, and some even grew bare wings to spy on the left and right. They did not even need to aim. A large number of bone bullets continuously hit the origin shield. Even if they were repelled, they would spread their wings and return. Just like a DDoS attack, A large amount of garbage data was constantly used to increase the pressure on the shield, causing the load on the defense system to rapidly increase. From the surrounding soil, countless huge iron balls were squeezed out of the blood water. Those huge iron balls, which were as tall as 2 people, quickly rolled on the ground. Huge sutured rats flicked their tongues after taking medicine, their eyes turned white as they frantically ran inside, pushing the iron balls to spin and roll. They closely chased around the sun's ship like marbles, constantly scratching and colliding with the armor of the ship. Sparks flew. Even more ropes were thrown out from the iron balls, wanting to hang on the side of the ship and rush onto the deck. But under the swing of the giant mechanical arm, they were thrown out one after another. F***CK, 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 I just repainted it! Raymond roared furiously. Why are these things so annoying? There were a few times when he could not help but fire. But until now, the other side still had not caused any effective damage to them. They were just like a group of flies flying around, unable to be killed, unable to be eliminated, but also extremely annoying. Don't be anxious. Huaisher leaned back in his chair and said calmly, wait a little longer. Wait until the other side could not hold on any longer. Those guys wanted to fight a war of attrition. But there was a sun ship equipped with a rock iron heart and a max-level Great Sea Ming here, so their endurance was basically maxed out. Would attrition be of any use? More importantly, there were those guys hiding in the dark who had not made a move yet. Just relying on numbers, I'm afraid it will be difficult to crush that kind of opponent, right? Mathers asked. Do you need my help? Anytime. No hurry. In the darkness, pitch-black tears flowed from the corner of Joker's eyes, but the smile at the corner of his mouth became crazier. Wait a little longer. It's like they are waiting for us. Even if the enemy was right in front of him, Hades still maintained his self-control, suppressing his killing intent, waiting for an opening to appear. But there was someone who could not wait any longer. At this moment, above the sky of the battlefield, a crack finally appeared. Holy light shone from it, as if the path to the kingdom of God had opened. Countless black shadows flew out from it. The hunting angels with wings on their backs sang praises, gathering into a huge ring and spreading out from it. Countless blurry concentric circles vaguely covered the entire battlefield. They turned everything into a sacrifice for the great ruler and God. The solemn sacrifice was about to begin. A towering figure slowly descended from the crack behind the sky. The 16 wings of light on his back flapped, and the glorious crown on his head burst out with light. His 4 arms held a spear, a one-handed sword, and a large shield respectively. His entire body was covered in heavy and solemn armor. On the golden helmet was a face of mercy weeping blood. Mercy for the people of the world, endless suffering. Under the command of the ruler of paradise, the Archangel of Mercy, a great existence called the Ruler had descended, overlooking everything in the mortal world. Soon, the spear was raised. It pointed to where the enemy was. Suddenly, the hunting angels in the sky sang praises loudly. Countless winged angels raised their hands, clenched the illusory holy light, and threw it down. In an instant, a storm of light spears covered the battlefield. Countless sharp blades stabbed into the shield, causing countless cracks to appear. An ear-piercing alarm sounded. Then, in the detection of the radar, dozens, hundreds, and thousands of high-threat targets appeared at the end of the horizon. Wisps of strange gray fog appeared from nothingness. Skinny armored knights that were 2 to 3 meters tall walked toward the battlefield. Wisps of gray fog coiled around their bodies, as if they were solid. The fog constantly changed, as if it was alive. Sometimes it was like a vicious giant snake, and sometimes it turned into the vague outline of a warhorse. It was the crystallization of endless pain, despair, and excitement. It was an origin-form beast raised by the cult of corruption, a fog that absorbed souls and ate origin form. The interior of the heavy armor was completely empty. Only countless chaotic and painful origin substances surged about, forming a frenzied soul that was eternally tormented and berserk. At this moment, the torment knights from the cult of corruption rode on the fog and stepped onto the battlefield. It was as if they couldn't see the Ratmen army in front of them, and didn't care about the attacks of the hunting angels above them. The torment knights advanced step by step, moving very quickly. The fog was like wings, allowing them to fly across the battlefield. The Black Death army in front of them was torn apart in an instant. Countless origin form was quickly sucked away and turned into a part of the crazy souls. The holy light spears that fell from the sky couldn't kill them. Instead, as the armor shattered, the tortured souls went crazy again. Scarlet tentacles extended from the cracks in the armor and constantly gnawed on the souls around them to make up for their own integrity. Unlike the group of cheap cannon fodder that couldn't be killed, this was the real army of hell. Okay. At that moment, Huaisher turned around and said to Anton, "Now, we can send out our gift." In the thick protective suit, the old professor revealed the unique expectant smile of the people of the Russian Federation. He raised his hand and smashed the big red button in front of him. There was a crisp sound, followed by the high-pitched sound of steel rubbing against each other. The deck of the Sun ship quickly flipped over and shrunk, revealing the launch track that led directly to the warehouse below, as well as countless budding flowers on the track. There was no need for GPS navigation, nor was there a need for radar locking. Relying on the most traditional mechanics and aerodynamics, this crystallization of war from the present world was once again created. The next moment, the thing that was once called the V-1 missile dragged a long tail flame and ejected from the track. It spread out its folded wings and flew into the cloudy sky. Then, it swooped down. It was difficult to estimate the number at that moment. Was it hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands? Even Anton himself didn't know how many leftover materials that Huaisher used up were sent to the assembly line and finally processed into one-off products after he set the law of automatic production. The only thing he knew was the report from the androids. A lot, so much that after filling up 2 warehouses, it filled at least the corridor and all the kobold rooms. Now, in the warehouse, countless kobolds were so moved that they were about to cry. They ran around to tell each other that they finally didn't have to sleep on bombs anymore. Their work efficiency was more than 10 times higher, and these deadly weapons were pushed onto the launch track at a speed that they had never experienced before in their lives. Launch, 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 and launch again. It wasn't until the sky was covered with dense black dots that 1/3 of the warehouse was finally cleared. Now, destruction was falling from the sky. "Woola!" Behind the mask, Anton whispered softly. Along with his words, countless terrifying blazing lights rose from the ground. It was as if they were in a dark and dense forest for an instant. It made them involuntarily feel the vastness of the world and their own insignificance. However, the forest here was not dark. Instead, it was bright. Above the countless giant trees that soared into the sky, flowers of flames bloomed. Tranquility no longer existed. Only a sweeping wave of burning wind covered everything in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the whole world seemed to be illuminated by flames. Countless metal explosives raged in this barren world, spread, and engulfed all the dust that dared to intrude into their domain, spreading heat and death. Leaving behind rising and spreading dust, blazing burning wind, countless metal vapors shining like spots of light, and even endless dark scorched earth. There was a moment of dead silence. Outside the range of the explosion, even the Black Death Legion's reserve troops, who did not know what was good for them, were stunned on the spot. Under the collapsed high platform, the ground suddenly bulged. The Plague Warlord, whose face was covered in dust, raised his head and saw the scene in front of him. He was not angry but happy. He was anxious. He was anxious. He was anxious. They had only sent out less than 1/3 of their forces. Moreover, He could feel that the huge object born from the corpses of countless ratmen under the ground was slowly taking shape. Ha ha ha, everyone, please take a look. This is their way of death. Even at this time, the plague warlord still did not forget to serve. He happily introduced to the people behind him. Squandering their strength like this may seem glorious, but in fact they are just digging their own graves. It won't be long before we can. The more he spoke, the more he felt that something was wrong. Because there was no response behind him. When he turned around in a daze, he saw the wreckage of countless missiles and the seats that had long been burned to ashes in the high temperature and completely evaporated. Wait, he rubbed his eyes and was stunned. Where were the VIP seats that were sitting here just now? F***CK. Where did the VIP seats go? The answer was that the VIP seats were gone. Because the main cannon fire from the sun's ship, it could be said to be exquisite. Let's do it again. On the bridge, Huaisher pointed at the plague warlord's face that was rapidly zooming in on the screen. This is too ugly. Hurry up and take it away. It hurts my eyes. No problem. Raymond grinned sinisterly and pulled the trigger. A blazing light flashed and disappeared. After a long time, the plasma that fell from the sky illuminated the dull face. Then, amidst a tragic scream, the person wearing the crown melted into ashes. This is too much. Under the charred ground, the soil soaked in blood quickly churned. A face covered in sutures crawled out and screamed as if he had lost his parents. VIP. My VIP. The plague warlord, who had been reborn from the corpse, was so distressed that he almost shed tears of blood. It was unknown whether he felt sorry for the boss or the rest of the money. Get him. Get him for me. The warlord raised his head and roared angrily at the sutured giant rats that crawled out of the soil behind him. Take revenge for the boss. The ground churned and more rat men crawled out of the graves. Then, behind them were giant bone cannons and almost completely animated siege towers. Under the plague warlord's crotch, the siege tower was made of pale skeletons with flesh and blood attached to it. Countless damaged ratmen were glued to it like leftovers, forming a genuine monster. Oh, it seems to be uglier. Raymond clicked his tongue and sighed as he spread out his arms. In front of him, countless hovering windows appeared to be aiming at the most dangerous targets. The bombardment from the sun ship's main cannon had begun. It was aimed at all enemies indiscriminately, and in the blanket attack of the metal bombs just now, many suffering knights and hunting angels that had been involved in the bombardment climbed up from the dust again. Except for a few unlucky ones that had been hit head-on, the others only had 2 more cracks on their bodies. It was not a big deal. And in the middle of the sky, the archangel ruler, who was hanging high, raised the spear in his hand again. Thus, endless holy light spears descended like a storm, tearing apart the missiles in midair. There were even furious hunting angels that had already pounced down, tearing apart the missiles that were about to explode, and swallowing the hot metal bombs into their stomachs. This time, the ruler finally took action. In his hand, the spear endlessly extracted the light from paradise. Layers of hymns wrapped around it, and the glorious and greedy light of hell converged into a faint, huge blade. It was aimed at the sun ship. The next moment, a ray of light flashed across the sky. A rumbling sound spread. The sun ship suddenly shook, and the origin shield wailed. Even though it was far away, it was already unable to bear the burden. Then, before it collapsed, it began to rapidly disappear. On the deck, Forster raised his shotgun expressionlessly, looked up at the glorious spear in the sky, and pulled the trigger. Chapter 1064. 2 seconds ago, after the emergency deactivation of the origin shield, the chief engineer knelt down on one knee on the deck. With the muzzle raised, the blessing of the 12 Titans descended. The ancestor of mankind, Iapetos, gave him the eyes to stare into the abyss. In an instant, he locked onto the enemy's location and saw the essence of the abyss. Then, the goddess of memory and the past, Monomosu, revealed the past to him, causing the world in front of him to fall apart into countless fragments of time. In the observation of that pair of eyes, countless extended lenses unfolded, and the amount of information that was enough to completely burn the brain exploded every moment. Finally, the goddess of radiant light, Fubai, gave a precious revelation. It was the eternal truth of the world. No matter what happened, no matter who, no matter where, all things would eventually return to death. Thus, all history and the past disappeared, and all that was left was a certain future. In the darkness, Forster had gradually glimpsed the end of time from the future, the death of the ruler. But before that, an endless terrifying shadow appeared behind the ruler, sprinkling a frenzied radiance. Rancher. That overly large silhouette had long covered the ruler's existence. Long ago, it had merged with the rancher's food chain and was inseparable. It was the hunting angel, the rancher's favorite fork, its fine and white teeth, its soft tongue, and at the same time, its stinky gastric juices and bile pa. Before the revelation was revealed, it had already disappeared in the chaos. As the illusory light dissipated, a fine cracking sound came from Forster's right eye. It was dark. Sticky blood streaks slid down from the corner of his eye like tears. "It's good to have a backer." Forster clicked his tongue expressionlessly. Although he had expected it, he couldn't help but feel lucky. Now that he had suffered a loss, there was nothing to say. He didn't rashly carve the other party's name. He directly pulled the trigger at the ruler in the sky. In the blink of an eye, a streak of metallic light flew out from the muzzle of the spear. It rose straight into the sky and collided with the spear of holy light descending from the sky. A high-pitched and sharp sound of friction burst forth and spread, almost enveloping the entire area, trampling on every innocent eardrum. After that, everyone saw that the huge spear that was falling from the sky was actually pierced through by a thin line of bullet marks. Countless fragments rapidly fell from above. The spear tip collapsed, turning into a rain of light that sprinkled down towards the ground. Everywhere it passed, everything was devoured by the eternal thirst contained within it, and it left behind numerous pitch-black marks. However, the bullet was still rising upward. He looked at the face of the ruler. Ridiculous. The archangel didn't even look down. She just casually slashed down with the sword in her hand, cutting the bullet forged by the great Grandmaster in half. The remains of the shrapnel flew out from both sides, but they did not disappear. Instead, they seemed to have come alive, and began to gallop and shuttle back and forth again. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky was covered by the flying streams of light. One was horizontal, the other was vertical. Those fine grids were like woven cloth, enveloping the entire sky and covering the sky of hell with a fog-like garment. After an instant, everything disappeared without a trace. Only a clean and neat fracture could be vaguely seen. Wherever that layer of fleeting grid passed, everything would silently fall apart. The spears of light thrown by the hunting angels were completely intercepted by this layer of fleeting grids. Not only that, but the angels at the very front were also quickly disintegrated. Solemn armor, sharp weapons, radiant wings, and even the remnants of the body made of pus and rotten flesh. Pitch-black blood sprinkled down like a torrential rain. A crisp sound finally burst forth from the ruler's helmet. On that merciful and bloodthirsty mask, two intersecting scratches slowly appeared. The ruler was slightly startled. Her scarlet eyes looked down once more. But after quickly closing the origin shield, Forster had already disappeared without a trace, hiding in the darkness once more. Only the scorching hot bullet shell continued to roll and bounce, gradually losing its temperature. "Run!" Forster shouted through the communication device. In the brief silence, the ruler's bloodthirsty face didn't change at all. Only the scarlet eyes behind the helmet gradually revealed fury. In her hand, the giant shield depicting the 46th floor of paradise was slowly raised. The holy light that filled the sky suddenly shrank, condensing into substance, revealing the outline of God's kingdom. Inside, the moment the gate of heaven opened, tens of thousands of rays of light burst out from within. An ear-piercing alarm exploded from the sunship. Raymond only felt a burst of horror burst out from his scalp. Long before that, he had pulled down the joystick of Flash Shuttle. But soon after, a mighty stream of light slashed down from the sky and swept across the ground, leaving behind a deep ravine. Hot pursuit. When the outline of God's kingdom dissipated with the exhaustion of the light, the reflection of paradise on the shield also dimmed and blurred. And on the ground dozens of deep cracks were spread out. Everywhere the light passed, everything was devoured by the greedy mouth of paradise. The hasty Flash Shuttle caused the Sun ship to slide on the ground in a sorry state, the stern of the ship drawing a ravine in the endless sea of monsters. In a short instant, Sun ship had already shuttled back and forth 16 times before narrowly dodging this wave of attacks that covered the entire area. The price was that the core engine was overloaded. The high temperature that was enough to burn people's skins spread out in the bottom compartment, and pillars of air spurted out from the pressure relief valve on the deck. It looked like a whale stranded on a barren beach. As early as the engine warmed up during the first jump, the origin shield had already shattered in an instant. Waves of green smoke rose from the stern of the ship, and the armor that covered it had already disappeared without a trace. Raymond's expression twitched. In the 16 jumps just now, if he had been just a little bit late, the entire ship might have been cut in half by that terrifying light. But without waiting for him to catch his breath, the Red Dragon let out an ear-piercing voice. "Impact warning!" The Sun ship suddenly shook, and a huge animated siege tower crawled out from the churning soil. The ugly face of the Plague Warlord appeared at the top of the siege tower, grinning sinisterly. "Aha, over here!" The siege tower that had been animated into a giant monster still had flames and charcoal from the metal fuel that was constantly peeling off. But at this moment, when it opened its arms, it clung tightly to the bow of the Sun ship, just like a ticket evader clinging to the front of a train. Through the window, it revealed a complacent and excited expression to the pilot. "Caught you guys." The reply was the main cannon of the Sun ship. It instantly rotated 180 degrees, and like a heavy iron rod, it smashed into its face. "Let go of this, Grandpa!" Raymond roared, and a huge mechanical arm stretched out from the cabin cover at the front of the ship, smashing into the belly of the animated siege tower like a fist. It tore open its carapace and pulled out the flesh and blood transmission structure inside. Rotten organs and blood flowed everywhere, and at the stern of the Sun ship, 16 nozzles instantly lit up. Engine number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 operated at full power, and the injection began. Amidst a loud boom, the Sun ship forcefully pushed forward against the siege tower that the Warlord had fused with, brazenly breaking through the encirclement of the other 2 siege towers. Then, the cannon barrel aimed at the Warlord's face lit up with lightning. Fire. It was as easy as smashing a broken watermelon. But immediately after, there was an earth-shattering collision sound. Everyone's vision turned black, and the brazenly speeding Sun ship seemed to have collided with a heavy mountain. It came to an abrupt stop, and terrifying tremors spread throughout the ship. Everyone involuntarily soared into the sky. In the hold, countless kobolds screamed in horror as they pounced at the missiles that had left their fixed frames, hugging them tightly, not daring to let go. At the bow of the ship, the animated siege tower that had been pushed forward had instantly been smashed into a pile of mud. But there was clearly nothing in front of them. There was only empty air. Even the radar didn't detect any traces of anything. It was as if the air had suddenly turned into heavy steel, blocking their path. Immediately after, the enemy hidden in the void seemed to be grinning sinisterly as it stretched out its huge arm and smashed down. The Sun ship that landed on the ground let out a wail. A turret on the deck was instantly smashed to pieces. Immediately after, with a huge sweep, the remaining machine guns and even the external radar were wiped out. An invisible force entangled the sun ship, forcefully pulling it up from the ground and suspending it in the air. The red dragon hissed and struggled. Its mechanical arm swept across, and sparks burst out in the air as if it had hit an enemy. Only now, when both sides were close, did a terrifying signal reaction appear from the radar's detection. The moment it appeared, it soared endlessly. It was almost at the level of a ruler. What the hell is that? Raymond widened his eyes. Only then did they see a silhouette slowly appear in the air in front of them. It was a fortress made of steel. Countless chimneys pointed to the sky and shot out pitch-black smoke. Dozens of huge metal legs and limbs supported this inconceivably exaggerated fortress. It stood on the ground. Deformed steel hands stretched out from the huge gate of the castle and hugged Sun's ship in their arms. On the walls of the fortress that were covered in rust, a blurry and abstract face slowly protruded, and the symbol of the newcomer appeared on its forehead. Above the totem logo of the Hell Workshop Master, there was a huge sequence of numbers. Number 77. The 77th Workshop Master had descended into this hell. No, even before the war began, it had been lurking in this eternal fog, waiting for the right moment. It was waiting for its prey to come to its door. It's time to pay back the interest, pretty boy of celestial genealogy. At the core of the machinery factory, surrounded by countless levers and buttons, the bloated workshop master, who was sitting upright on the operator's seat, gritted his teeth. His 3 eyes were filled with viciousness and anger. I swear, one day, that bitch Sunmaker will meet the same end as you. At the front of the fortress, the face opened its mouth, and the structure of the fortress began to change rapidly. It split open from the middle, revealing a ferocious mouth that bit the side of the Sun's ship. Steel rubbed against each other, and sparks flew out from the armor. Countless spinning blades and sharp blades pierced deeply into the armor of the Crimson Dragon. No matter how much the Crimson Dragon roared and struggled, its thick arm had already grabbed the body of the main cannon and forcefully broke it apart. Under Raymond Supreme, the armor began to repair rapidly, but it could only delay the time. They were already in the grip of the Hell Workshop, and it was difficult for them to break free. The workshop master pulled the hub and laughed loudly. With a hatred that could not wait to devour their bones and skin, the fortress-like factory opened its mouth wide, and countless transmission belts and assembly lines continuously swallowed the stripped armor into its stomach. Of course, the bomb that Huaishur threw out was also included. Gotcha! A crisp sound rang out. In the blink of an eye, blazing flames spurted out from the mouth, together with countless broken saw blades and structures. It was like a torrent, as if vomiting. But at this moment, the deck shook violently and retreated to both sides. A high platform slowly rose from the darkness, revealing a familiar figure. There was also Ah Fong in his hand. "Hello, mongrel." Huaishur waved her right hand to show off her forging furnace and asked curiously, "What's the matter? Do you still remember this?" At that moment, as if countless painful memories were evoked, a furious roar rang out from the steel workshop's loudspeaker. Then, it turned into an out-and-out painful wail. Because with a flash, Ah Fong, which was infused with all the origin substance in Huaishur's hand and turned everything into mass, had already smashed into the face in front of the castle. The terrifying quality of the stone essence hall was entrusted to the whip of the long truncheon. In an instant, a huge crack was torn open from top to bottom, causing the originally ugly and swollen face to become even more sinister as it spasmed and twitched. After the crack, smelly oil and fuel spilled out like blood. "That's why, don't be happy too early." Huaishur gave a serious advice. "You have to understand, what the Sunmaker can do, I can do too. And sometimes—" He bent down slightly, as if preparing to sprint, and smiled. "I will do better than her." Chapter 1065. There was a moment of deathly stillness. Even the workshop owner found it hard to believe. Perhaps they were shocked by his arrogance. Such shameless boasting! A mere third-level cultivator actually dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the ruler. But for some reason, when Huaishir said those words, the workshop owner couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. It was as if that D*MNB*TCH was standing right in front of him. But it was different from that damned woman. She was always expressionless, even when she was killing and destroying, but Huaishir was different. Even when he was surrounded by enemies 10 times or 100 times their number, and countless deaths were happening right before his eyes, he still maintained that unsettling smile. His empty fingers clenched slightly. Without any warning, a slender sword appeared in his hand. Following his movements, resplendent light gathered, and the light of the virtuous sword shot out. It tore through the eternal night of hell. The divinity that was blessed by the King of Light was poured into it, and it shone with a brilliance and light that was dozens of times brighter than before. It floated up into the sky as if it was nothing, and it cut through the eternal dark clouds and fog. The dazzling light stung everyone's eyes. But before the workshop owner could react, Huaishir stepped forward and slashed down with the sword. The workshop roared. Within the control room, the workshop master howled angrily as he pulled down a lever, causing the large, blurry mouth to spit out countless white bubbles. The viscous bubbles flew through the air like a rapidly growing fence, absorbing all of the origin substance, calamity chi, and even the infernal realm's precipitation, rapidly growing. But when that majestic light flashed past, not only the others, but even the workshop owner was stunned. It was like an illusion. There was no damage at all. Only the shrill sound of the wind seemed to come from afar, and the workshop owner's face instantly flushed red. That seemingly terrifying and majestic slash of light was nothing more than a facade. It was just for show. Sorry, I took the wrong one. Huaishir smiled apologetically, and the illusion of the virtuous sword in his right hand dissipated. Then, a sharp blade shot out from his left hand hidden at his waist. It should be this, he said. Resentment. The crow's cause disappeared in a flash. In the blink of an eye, the resentment had pierced through the bubble's defense against Origin's substance and energy, crossing the almost non-existent distance between them and burrowing into the massive face at the front of the fortress. The 49.9-meter-long Imperial Godblade was blood-red. Countless feather-like patterns appeared on the edge of the blade. Even the sound of metal scraping against metal sounded like the screeching of iron crows. Sweep. Under the support of mastery, symphony, it was as if even the humming of the sun ship under his feet was integrated into Huaishir's body, bursting forth with endless power along with him. High temperature and vibrations suddenly burst out from Huaishir's body, tearing apart the jacket and shirt on his upper body, revealing his steel-like arms. He gripped the blade tightly. A power that was comparable to this exaggerated level burst forth from his hands, pressing down the blade inch by inch. It tore through all obstacles like a hot knife through butter, leaving a new crack on the distorted face, crisscrossing like a cross. The huge mouth that was originally biting down on the sun ship was torn apart by this swift and fierce sweep. Immediately after, as Huaishir turned around, the blade spun around like a dance, contracting and expanding once again, chopping down on the workshop's mechanical arms that were clamping down on the sun ship. As a result, the miserable screams didn't stop, bursting forth with a new climax. When the two giant arms were torn apart, the workshop's fortress found it difficult to clamp down on the sun ship's movements. Under the terrifying power of full-power propulsion, even the steel was emitting a distorted wail. Break free from the cage. Just like that, in front of that furious and distorted face, the sun ship rose into the air once again, riding on the ripples of the underworld river and speeding away. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. The workshop owner roared. The fortress's massive body quickly turned around, and its thick arms stretched out, tightly grabbing onto the ship's tail. Countless ropes stretched out from the cracks in the arms, coiling around the ship as if they were alive and contracting. It didn't care about the cannon fire. The sun's ship suddenly became sluggish, and its speed came to an abrupt stop once again. The dragon's bones trembled violently, and the distorted steel produced waves of resounding and sharp sounds. At this moment, he no longer cared about saving costs. Even though his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife, the workshop owner had already come to the realization that he had no choice but to bleed heavily. From the moment they set off until now, even in the process of waiting, this workshop was still operating continuously, constantly accumulating products. Plunder, production, dumping. This was something that was engraved into the instincts of every workshop owner. It was this endless thirst for benefits, as well as the huge profits brought about by monopolizing technology, that made the workshop owners of Hell the rulers. At the peak, with the first 19 rulers as the foundation, countless branch workshops were distributed in different depth. With supply chains and trade contracts between them as connections, they formed a huge production organization that covered the deep regions to the dark abyss regions. The more there were, the stronger the power they could display. Even if they had to fight against established powers like a fallen country or the corrupt order, they weren't afraid at all. Regretfully, there was no possibility of harmonious coexistence between workshop owners. The more they gathered in one place, the more benefits and rewards they demanded. If the benefits brought by the outside world couldn't satisfy their greed, they would start internal strife. Sometimes they would even nibble at each other before the war even started. Therefore, most of the time, they were scattered in different places, constantly dumping products in different hells, plundering huge profits. After using this profit to strengthen themselves, they would plunder more, until they owned the entire abyss. It should have been like this. But in the previous War of Worlds, after the defeat in the decisive battle with the Sea of Lightning, the situation began to take a turn for the worse. Before the pain of being stabbed in the back by the Eternal Frost Core had dissipated, the bitch who had once rejected their invitation had actually broken free from her cage. Since then, life had been difficult. Once upon a time, they had chosen to invest generously because they saw the potential of the Sunmaker. Now, when the woman who went against the rules of production started to take revenge, they once again deeply felt the pain born from this eternal hatred. In less than half a year, the revitalization plan they had prepared for a long time died in the womb. Number 14, Number 9, and Number 5, among the remaining 10 rulers in the production sequence, 3 of them were thrown into the Eternal Frost Core by her, losing all their property and profits in eternal torture. As the direct supplier and subgroup of Number 14, if Number 77 couldn't prove its ability and efficiency in a short period of time, it would probably be completely merged by Number 1. After losing its independence and trademark, it would be forced into bankruptcy and liquidation. At that time, not only would his factory be forcefully merged into Number 1's Eternal World Group, even he himself would become a machine that processed endless reports for Number 1 in the cubicle under the terms of loans and debts in the contract. This was his only chance. The moment he pulled down the red joystick while enduring the pain in his heart, the huge face on the animated fortress suddenly widened its eyes. Hot steam spewed out from its mouth and nose, and countless bright red streamers sprinkled down from the top of the factory along with loud and impassioned music. From this moment onwards, the Hell Shopping Festival began. Countless murmurs and high-pitched screeches echoed in the ears of every living creature, endlessly repeating the countless preferential policies. 1,000 off 1,000, 800 off 800, rare opportunity, can't be missed, trillions of subsidies, discount, disaster broadcast, buy 2 and get 1 free, interest-free silicone wife, limited reservation for out-of-print ruler statue, get a voucher now to participate in the 0 yuan rush sale, and so on. Countless strange voices rose and fell, stirring up every rational soul, bringing with them endless temptation. As the overwhelming advertisements spread out, the big mouth on the fortress once again opened to a terrifying extent. countless packages of various sizes spewed out from the assembly line like a torrential rain. Clearance of the warehouse. Those cardboard boxes with strange legs and feet converged into a tide, falling from the sky and instantly covering the entire deck of Sun's ship. When the cardboard packages were opened, countless strange bubbles with a foul stench overflowed from them. Even though there were countless palpitating silhouettes that were constantly changing, the malice and malevolence within were hard to conceal. The instant they appeared, they began to rapidly corrode the deck of the ship, connecting with each other and forming a silhouette that was between reality and illusion, almost covering more than half of Sun's ship within. If what was promoted in countless flyers and advertisements was a luxurious dream that could only be bought by exhausting all assets and borrowing, then at this moment, what was produced by the workshop was an out-and-out nightmare. The eternal nightmares extracted from solidified souls one after another were finely processed and divided before being painted into a beautiful form, bewitching one unlucky soul after another until they also became a part of the product. There was no need for after-sales service, no need for a 3-pack certificate, and no need for any standard verification. The moment the customer purchased the product, they had already become a new product. This was the business rule of hell. Number 77 Nightmare Workshop. At this moment, the endless nightmares merged into one in the bubbles, forming a strange and huge monster that began to rapidly devour Sun's ship. Under the assimilation of the nightmare, the thick armor gradually became transparent and was pulled into the nightmare bit by bit on the collapsed deck. Sure could almost imagine Raymond screaming miserably as if he had lost his parents. But at this moment, he no longer cared about dealing with the attack and erosion from the workshop owner, because an out-and-out threat was right in front of him, descending from the sky. When the glorious wings slowly retracted, the ruler slowly raised his sorrowful face and raised the spear, sword, and shield in his hand. He aimed at the prey in front of him. "Give up resistance, outsider," he announced solemnly. "Only then can you walk up the altar of my Lord in the most complete state." Behind him, countless hunting angels turned into dark clouds and pounced down from the sky. They began to attack fiercely from the workshop owner's devouring. The torment knights, shrouded in gray fog, had turned into a torrent that swept toward the broken ship. In the sky, on the ground, in all directions, they were all enemies. There was no way for them to escape. In a short silence, Sure looked around and was full of curiosity. Seriously, can the situation be worse? As if hearing his expectations and calls, the generous hell satisfied all his wishes about disaster. In terms of making people despair, the abyss never made people despair. Above the shattered sky, there was suddenly a loud rumble. A galloping lightning suddenly appeared. Accompanied by the sea breeze and the stench of fresh blood, a 3-meter-tall giant appeared at the end of the deck. All the hunting angels and torment knights around him were incinerated into ashes by the electric light emanating from his body. It was Skull Hunter from the Sea of Thunder, a twin dwarf blessed by the 2 rulers of the growth moon and the dark tide. Holding a heavy battle axe in his hand, he raised his 2 completely different heads and looked around. Who is Sure? Although he asked this, his 2 pairs of eyes had already locked onto Sure's position and stared at his head, full of hunger and desire. "Yes, that's right, it's me." In the final silence before the arrival of the great battle, Sure raised his hand and asked curiously, "Let me ask, do you have the habit of first come, first served? For example," he glanced at the ruler in front of him and the twin dwarfs behind him and suggested, "Line up?" In that instant, the Dominator's mask of compassion and the twin dwarfs' faces both revealed the same sinister smile. The answer was no. Chapter 1066. In that instant, thunder rumbled and the heavens shook. The entire upper deck of the Sun ship was suddenly covered by a storm. Dark purple lightning and strange sinister holy light burst forth at the same time. There was no such thing as righteousness in the pugilistic world, and no one had the courtesy to line up one by one. To deal with a righteous sect, everyone decisively chose to work together, taking advantage of his weakness to take his life. Even if they were surrounded and determined to win, they didn't show the slightest bit of carelessness. However, the expected clumsiness and wretched dodging did not appear. On the contrary, in that instant, regardless of whether it was the ruler or the skull hunter, they all had a strange illusion. It was as if they were the ones being besieged. The instant they came into contact, they were shocked by the storm-like counterattack, retreating several dozen meters at the same time, returning to their original positions. They widened their eyes in shock. "What's wrong?" Huai Shi still stood in his original position, as if nothing had happened, full of doubt. "Didn't you say you were going to attack together?" He paused for a moment and then asked mockingly, "Could it be that you are tired from the journey and are not acclimatized? Why don't you rest for a while, and I'll order some takeout for you?" The disdain and mockery that flowed out from his bones did not incite the enemy's anger, but in that instant, regardless of whether it was the ruler or the twin dwarves, they all rushed forward again. They went all out. As they galloped at lightning speed, the twin skull hunter's mouth, nose, and eyes surged with dazzling light. The blazing red battle-axe in his hand quickly swelled, melting molten iron, and like a sword being unsheathed, eternal lightning shot out from the depths of the sea of lightning. Compared to true lightning, it was nothing more than a short several dozen meters long. However, at this moment, wherever the lightning condensed from countless calamities past, the thick armor and ruins on Sun's ship were torn apart like bubbles, turning into dust. The ruler, who held a spear, sword, and shield shrouded in holy light, was like a meteor falling from the sky, dragging a blazing tail behind it, brazenly advancing from the front, not leaving behind the slightest opening. But no matter which one it was, what responded to them was a merciless sword. In this brief moment, the Huai Shi in their eyes seemed to have lost his silhouette, turning into an amorphous shadow. Within the emaciated body, the origin substance's attributes were constantly changing. Light and shadow intersected, stacking together to create an ambiguous and complicated chaos. Unfathomable. However, the moment he touched her, the ambiguous superposition state was broken. Immediately after, it was a torrential counterattack. It was as though he had gained 3 heads and 8 arms in an instant. The hammer of pain collided with the axe of thunder, causing dazzling sparks to fly. But right after that, resentment and hatred suddenly pierced through this extremely narrow gap, nimbly flying towards the necks of the 2 heads, leaving behind deep gouges that were so deep that their bones could be seen. However, at the same time, Ah Fong raised his hand from Huai Shi's hand and hacked down on the incoming shield. Mountains collapsed and rivers flowed in reverse. Pure mass smashed a crack in the perfect defense. Immediately after, Bai Lu's phantom image flashed, and the spear of compassion had already parried the ruler's spear. It pierced straight through, piercing a deep gash in the ruler's chest behind the armor. Blood surged. This was no longer within the range of a cord that could instantly attack a single target multiple times. In front of these 2 crown warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles, Su Chern was fighting 1 against 2. He was even simultaneously executing complex blocks and counterattacks without any order. The flow of power and the coordination between his weapons were flawless. He was clearly one person, but in that instant, it was as if 7 different ascendants had surrounded and attacked 2 opponents who had stepped into the realm of reality. Have you heard of a symphony before? In the midst of this intense battle of life and death, they suddenly heard Huai Shi's words. His words were flat and straightforward, without any ups and downs. But in front of them, the eyes of the young man who had appeared suddenly lit up with flames. It was as if a deep abyss had been ignited, wild and tyrannical. He looked disdainfully at everything in front of him. Just treat it as an impromptu public lecture. The rope of sorrow shot out like a snake, binding the ruler's armor and suppressing it for a moment. The hammer of pain smashed down, dispersing the mighty holy light. At the same time, Ah Fong rushed forward, colliding with the lightning axe. Angry flames swept across, and the axes rubbed against each other, bursting into sparks. Just like that, he personally demonstrated the essence of art to the layman in front of him. Even for those who had never come into contact with it, something like a symphony was too complicated and too distant. But no matter who it was, through this experience, they would be able to deeply understand the beauty of it, right? Closing one's eyes, it was as if one could feel the vast symphony sweeping in from all directions. String section, woodwind section, brass section, percussion section, and color instrument section. Countless subtle changes were hidden within close proximity, constantly changing. The so-called symphony was built on this foundation, a behemoth composed of countless single tunes. Now anger, sorrow, regret, resentment, pain. 7 different tones were combined into one in Huai Shi's hands, turning into a torrent. Even if his hands could not cover everything, under the command of his heart, countless afterimages appeared on the stage that he had set, responding to his command. Playing the melody. Even if it was just for a brief moment, at this moment, he had completely turned himself into the entrance to the returning ruins. Great Si Ming's afterimage emerged from the entrance at an astonishing speed. After being equipped with Origin Substance equipment, he brazenly launched an attack on the enemy. Even if they only had the strength for a single attack, when the afterimages dissipated, new afterimages would appear from the ultimate. As if it would never stop. This was a brand new application that Huai Shi had developed from his own supreme, a brand new domain that transcended the boundaries of drummers and Emperor Yu's steps. Get ready, both of you. In the brief interval, Huai Shi wiped away the viscous blood that was seeping out of his nostrils, ignoring the side effects without a care in the world. But now I'm an orchestra all by myself. In that instant, the light of burning Origin equipment burst out from his eyes. Under the protection of countless afterimages, the symphony reached its climax. However, what the ruler and skull hunter could not accept was not this skill that was beyond common sense, but Huai Shi's upper limit. With such an unimaginable consumption rate, even if he had 10 times more Origin equipment, it should have been depleted long ago. How could there be so much energy to support Huai Shi's extravagance? Until one of the twin dwarves glanced outside the sunship, only then did they see the shockingly huge shadow. On the battlefield, under the cover of the flock of crows, the gravitational force of Ruin's End quickly spread, pulling all the shattered souls and scattered Origin substances into the eternal darkness, and once again refining them into pure shadow crystals in the furnace fire. At this moment, all the opponents blocking in front of Huai Shi were using their own lives to provide the best conditions for him. War was not his enemy, but his companion. Death would not take away anything from him, but would instead provide him with an endless supply of power. Now, when the drum beats of the hammer of agony dissipated in the air, a terrifying melody was born from Huai Shi's free and unrestrained play. It was an ancient and classic narrative song, an endless poem that described death and parting. Its name was Demon King. At this moment, on the bridge of the sun ship, Raymond's ear-piercing cries were still spreading. F***CK, 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 help, they're coming in, they're coming in. The tool man who was wrapped in layers of cables shouted in horror, Huai Shi, save me! The sound of armor cracking rose and fell. In front, there was the devouring and infiltration of the Hell Workshop Master. Behind, there was the forceful attack of the Hunting Angels and the Torment Knights, and there was also a group of endless ratmen harassing them. No matter how fierce the warship was, it could not withstand such attacks. After the topmost deck was broken, several cracks that led directly to the interior had already appeared. Now, even if the defensive gate was put down and they were isolated in the middle layer, they would not be able to hold on for long. They would either be completely dissolved by the nightmare of the workshop master, or be completely annihilated by the Hell army that attacked from both sides. There was no good outcome left or right. Ming Ming was already prepared to face death, but when death was at hand, Raymond began to panic, especially now that he was still bound to the chair by his own sacred mark and could not move. At least let people move and resist. You can shut the F***ck up. The red dragon angrily stuffed a source substance pipe into his throat. Eat all of it. Not a single drop is left. Now, almost all of the source substance reserves had been poured into Raymond's stomach. Under the support of the supreme tier of the source blood's qualitative change, the skyrocketing blue bar was rapidly transforming into a health bar to repair the gap on the ship. Unfortunately, even if it was a temporary emergency repair, it would not last long. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before it was broken. Even so, they still had to fight for time. From the hands of the enemy, at this moment, the internal structure of the Sun ship was constantly changing and reorganizing. Everything that was not important was destroyed in the rough dismantling by their own people. The huge and complicated secret instrument, as Gregory hurriedly arranged it, slowly revealed its own outline, slowly reading its own progress. Loud cracking sounds burst out one after another. In the narrow corridor, the hunting angels had already swarmed in, violently destroying everything in sight. Finally, their line of sight fell on the last barrier in front of them. At that moment, the defensive gate that was dozens of meters thick actually slowly rose up. It opened a path to the core for the outsiders. But when the hungry invaders rushed into the shockingly wide space, what they saw was a towering iron wall. The suffocating array was waiting in front of them. On the pitch-black helmet, there were still traces of paint that had not dried on the emblem belonging to the celestial genealogy. The huge body of more than 2 meters was covered in thick armor. From head to toe, there was not a single gap exposed to the air. In their hands, the monster-level 30mm caliber machine guns that had just been distributed from the assembly line were still reflecting a blue light. And right in front of the strict array there was a large dirty doll standing. In the pitch-black mouth hole, accompanied by the scattering of green smoke, a hand holding a cigarette reached out and flicked the ash. He also greeted the visitors cordially. "Surprise, another Fuker!" Chapter 1067. When the burning cigarette was slightly raised between the two slender fingers, there were countless crisp sounds gathered together, turning into the thunder before the storm. The thunder resounded, and countless blazing flashes burst out from the darkness. The park guards stepped forward and pushed the iron wall forward. In their hands, the autocannons spun wildly, spitting out smoke, light, and even heavy steel. Without any processing or modification, the bullets that had just been loaded into the cartridge box from the assembly line were just the most common cursed iron. However, when the metal explosives inside were ignited by the runes in the gun's chamber, countless coarse iron pieces swirled along the rifling and rubbed until they turned red. Now, the red rainstorm was pouring down. It whipped the air, the ceiling, the deck, and even everything in front. The fog of the burning metal explosives rose up, and the high-temperature mercury vapor drifted in the enclosed space, shining like a light mist. It fell on the dirty ragdoll clothes, and after burning away the old dirt, it seemed that even the ragdoll clothes covered in patches became bright and beautiful. "What's that saying again?" The ragdoll clothes spat out a mouthful of green smoke from the big mouth, looking around at the hunting angels who were crazily pouncing on them in the storm, thought for a moment and sighed softly. "Holy!" Boom! The iron wall guards stepped forward again, and after throwing away the overheated autocannons, they pulled out their axes and halberds from behind, and shouted fanatically along with Kitten's words. Stepping on the sticky blood under their feet, they moved forward, and the killing began again. On the other side of the Sun ship, the corridor that was less than 1 meter wide had long been dyed scarlet with blood, and the gathered Nagas began to counterattack again. Even if it was a one-sided massacre, The cold-blooded Nagas seemed to not know what fear and panic were. They rushed to the invincible opponents one after another, using their own lives to buy a short time for their loyal followers. The pool of blood spread like a river. "Sir, please come with me." The elder raised the bone blade and slashed cleanly. The twisted and sealed door in front of him was torn apart, opening a gap for the elder behind him. Behind the door, in the narrow cabin, countless instruments were emitting sparks and smoke. The broken circuit triggered the explosion of the oxygen production equipment, and the broken transmission shaft of the auxiliary engine had flown out dozens of meters away. The twisted shaft pierced into the cabin, and black oil dripped from it. "Clean up the scene, immediately." Anton in the protective suit turned around, and the cyborgs with oxygen masks rushed in one by one, violently overturning the irrelevant things and pushing them aside, revealing the huge engine that was still running crazily in the center. The terrifying heat spread like a furnace. The temperature inside the cylinder is out of control, and it is about to explode. Anton roared, "Red Dragon, turn off the power!" "The temperature control module and subcontrol mainframe have been damaged, Professor," the Red Dragon reported. "Please retreat immediately, Professor. I will start the ejection program later." Ejection? Why, isn't it? If the temperature control module can't be fixed, then do it manually. Anton stepped forward as if he didn't hear anything. He pulled out the axe outside the toolbox, and the kinetic skeleton was operating at full power. He slashed with all his strength, tearing the wall apart, and violently cutting off the pipes buried inside. Suddenly, turbulent water gushed out, violently pouring on the surface of the cylinder that was about to melt, turning into thick steam, cooling down the large engine in such a reckless way that the high temperature had gone out of control, left the possibility of an explosion behind. There's still time, just a little more time." The elder ran away from the axe in his hand and staggered forward in the thick steam. He pressed his hands on the red-hot engine, and an ear-piercing sound kept bursting out. Countless machines seemed to be endowed with life, breaking through the ceiling, falling down, and once again connecting to the wheel cabin. Like an electric pacemaker attached to the heart, it once again injected new vitality into the unit that was on the verge of collapse. "Connect the new transmission shaft to me, quickly!" He raised his head and shouted. "There's no time, Professor," the Red Dragon reported. "Area B2 is about to fall. In order to protect the inner unit, we have to seal off the entire area. Please retreat immediately." "Then seal it off, don't worry about me," Anton roared. Through the mask that was covered with mist, his eyes seemed to have been burned red by the engine. 10 minutes, give me 10 minutes." The Red Dragon was silent for a moment. Then, a familiar voice sounded from outside the cabin door behind him. 10 minutes, right?" Forster took off the cigarette that was wet from the steam at the corner of his mouth and threw it on the floor. "Do what he said. I'll think of a way for the rest." "Then 15 minutes, Professor Anton corrected without turning his head. "Maybe 20 minutes. Hey, don't increase the price." Forster shrugged helplessly. "We agreed on 15 minutes, no more." He sighed softly, looking at the torn door at the end of the corridor, and the tormented knights with scarlet eyes shrouded in gray fog. The pitch-black armored knights slowly stepped forward, the blades in their hands already covered in blood. Forster lowered his head and loaded 2 brand-new deer hunting bullets into the gun chamber. Finally, he measured the distance between them, put the shotgun on his shoulder, pulled out the curved hunting knife from his waist, and held it upside down. In the silence, there was only the sound of a large amount of water gushing out of the pipe, like the echoing sound of the tide. Suddenly, it was as if they had returned to the blue sea and blue sky. A moist breeze mixed with the smell of blood blew from afar. "I really want to go surfing," Forster murmured softly and narrowed his eyes. In front of him, the gray fog was like a wave, vast and mighty. On the deck, in the midst of the chaotic struggle, The performance of the movement suddenly paused for a moment, and Huaishur finally staggered back a step. Sticky blood flowed down from his nose and fell on the cracked deck, spreading endless curses, dyeing the entire area into a pool of poison. But the poison that was enough to kill a large group of people in hell was just a small inconvenience to the enemy in front of him. In comparison, it was not even comparable to the deep cuts and wounds on their bodies, arms, chest, neck, and even one eye. The twin dwarves held the axe of thunder, moving around like lightning as if they did not know fatigue and pain. The ruler had already run away, the cumbersome and broken shield in his hand, and his 4 arms were holding a spear, a long sword, and 2 short knives pulled out from his back. Surrounded by layers of afterimages, Huaishur raised his hand and wiped away the blood from the corner of his eyes, mouth, and nose. He did not care, even if Great Sea Ming's stigmata was reaching its limit. "Hey, can you guys do it?" He looked up and sneered. "Are you going to be killed by me even when 2 against 1? The ruler was speechless, the long sword and short knife in his hand suddenly turned upside down, piercing through the cracks on his armor and into his body. The metal dissolved and surged as if it was alive. Like a great tonic, it was chewed and swallowed by the body, and a dazzling light shot out from his mouth and nose. Then, the archangel's 4 arms held the dazzling spear, and like a comet, his body was covered in blazing flames as he pushed forward. The freezing wind from the sea of lightning spread out. The Gemini gnomes raised their battle axes high and roared loudly. Their 2 mouths chanted the praises of the growing moon and the dark tide. The Gemini gnomes bathed in lightning and their bodies expanded once again. In their hands, the branch of thunder was also rapidly growing, splitting, and in the end, it was as if a tree of thunder was held in their hands, violently slashing. An unprecedentedly huge pressure came. A fang swept up the blood tide on the battlefield and swept it towards the lightning. The surging liquid was filled with the weight of the stone marrow hall, and it crashed down from hundreds of meters away. On the sword of virtue, flames rose again. In the short gap created by the blade of the axe and the spear, a dazzling stream of light flew out, colliding with the calamitous star that the ruler had turned into. Huaishur raised his hand and guided the afterimage to play a brand new climax. However, that magnificent ensemble came to an abrupt stop at this moment. An ordinary bone blade protruded from Huaishur's chest. In the shadows, the Knight of Torment, whose body was wrapped in grey fog, slowly appeared. However, unlike the other knights, he did not wear a ferocious helmet. His messy long hair draped over his face, and his beard was unshaven. He looked very dispirited. That withered face seemed to be filled with eternal sorrow and tiredness. He hated everything in the world, and he hated himself, the champion of sorrow. After hiding for a long time, the crown-wearer seized the only opening and stabbed with his sword. Even the premonition of death could not detect the spying and attack from the shadows. In an instant, the sword pierced through the heart. Lightning slashed down, and a comet crashed down. Waves of air swept out. But soon, the 2 figures were sent flying. The afterimage did not stop at all, and his counterattack was not shaken by this sudden stab. And Huaishur's palm was already tightly holding the blade that pierced through his chest. "Hello, nice to meet you." Huaishur slowly turned his head and asked the visitor behind him in confusion. "Why don't you introduce yourself first?" After hitting the target, the champion of sorrow did not hesitate to let go and retreated. But the chains that extended from Huaishur's shadow wrapped around his legs and slowed him down for a moment. Then, Huaishur's left hand clenched, and the blade of the Spear of Compassion appeared and pierced through his own body in reverse. The bone blade and the spreading curse were instantly torn apart, and it followed the face of the champion of sorrow. On that eternally sorrowful face, a curved scar was left. It was like a smile. You should smile more. Like me, people who like to smile have good luck. Huaishur reached out and pulled out the broken bone blade from the hole in his chest. He looked up and let out a long breath. "Look, I was a little out of breath, but I didn't expect someone to open a hole for me. It's really refreshing." The champion of sorrow did not smile. Under the armor all over his body there was a murky sound. The scar on his face quickly shrank, and sharp bone spikes grew out from the cracks of the armor. Finally, a ferocious halberd appeared in his hand, and he pointed it at Huai Shi's face. Together with the other enemies. Now, with 3 times the number of enemies, 3 times the surprise. In the short silence, Huai Shi's vision turned dark. When he heard the roars and the sounds of fighting under his feet and behind him, he could not help but be absent-minded for a moment. It was as if the remnant of the past here had appeared in front of his eyes again. Were their roars now the same as the cries for the future in the past? Fighting, fighting, and blood. After 70 years, Huai Shi was standing on the land where the ancestors fought. The scars they left behind were here, the same as his own scars. Because of this, he felt indescribable joy and satisfaction. It was as if he was fighting side by side with the deceased. His own war had just begun. The war that belonged to them was still going on. Therefore, he could not lose. Let us once again become enemies with the abyss. Huai Shi raised his hand, licked the blood on his fingertips, and whispered softly to the heroic souls buried in this land. Please look at me, please with me. As the scars shrank, the flames of origin substance appeared in Huai Shi's eyes again. As if he was accompanied by an army of 10,000, he proudly spread his arms, showing the enemies everything he had. Come! Huai Shi raised his head and declared war on them. Let me experience the power of hell. There was no need to say anything else. At that moment, the ruler, the twin dwarves, the champion of sorrow, and the crowns from various hells raised their weapons and attacked the remnants of the utopia in front of them. A storm swept across. In the spreading airwaves, the blades of swords and spears swept across. The piercing light of metal constantly tore the darkness apart and defeated the light of gods. 1 against 3. Even though he was seriously injured, he did not feel afraid. On the contrary, his heart was surging. The light of the stars from the past was still shining on his shoulders, laughing with him as he launched a counterattack against the enemies in front of him. Saber, sword, spear, axe, hammer, truncheon, rope, they had clearly become familiar with Huai Shi's weapons in this fierce battle, but at this moment, the crowns felt an unprecedented pressure. Under the combined attacks, the will hidden within the origin substance equipment continued to rise, burning along with the burning of his soul. It became more and more violent, more and more strange, and more difficult to predict, but weapons were still weapons in the end. The champion of sorrow, who had experienced tens of thousands of battles, did not waver. The halberd in his hand swept across, as if he was exchanging injuries for injuries. He actually forcefully locked the changes in Huai Shi's moves, creating a gap for the others to attack. After an intense battle, they had already seen the gap between the weapons and found a way to deal with it. The truncheon's whip was thunderous and could not be blocked head-on, but it could still be dodged calmly. The bloodthirsty blade of hatred had to be deflected and blocked to guard against the change in the blade's length. The spear was light and agile, and the long-distance stabs were too swift. They needed to be prepared in advance. The virtuous sword's attacks were very troublesome. They needed to close the distance and suppress it. Now, after forcefully blocking off Fang's attack, the twin giants retreated a step. The lightning tree in their hands expanded once again as they smashed down. The sorrowful face and the ruler seemed to have a tacit understanding. They attacked from both sides, sealing off the gaps in Huai Shi's dodging, not hesitating to be heavily injured by the pain and resentment. But in the instant that Huai Shi waved his hand, they saw a black shadow fly out from his hand. It instantly expanded, nimbly circling around their blockade like a snake, instantly destroying the lightning that had just lit up. Tragic roars sounded out. The twin dwarves staggered backwards. One of their heads had already been smashed to pieces by this unexpected attack. Having lost the support of the lightning tree, The ruler and the sorrowful face's attacks were a step too slow. At this moment, under the counterattack of the shadow, deep cracks appeared on their chests and right hands, revealing bone. They instantly retreated a step. It was only now that they could clearly see the thing in Huaishi's hand. It seemed to contain endless sorrow and pain. The wolf head hammer dragged along snake-like chains, surpassing the speed of sound. It moved horizontally in the air, letting out a series of loud rumbling sounds. That was a flail. This happened too suddenly. I'm really sorry. In front of them, Huaishi lowered his head and glanced at the flail in his hand. He helplessly shrugged. Look at you guys. You scared me to the point of leveling up. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.